Good evening. I'll bring to order this meeting for the Salem Housing Authority of the City of Salem for Monday, October 23rd, 2023. Would the recorder please call the roll?
Commissioner Nishioka?
Here.
Vice Chair Phillips?
Here.
Commissioner Gwynn?
Here.
Commissioner Gonzalez?
Here.
Commissioner Hoy?
Here.
Commissioner Nordyke?
Here.
Commissioner Varney?
Here.
Resident Commissioner Villegas absent. Chair Stapleton?
I'm here. Thank you so much. All right, would Commissioner Hoy, would you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. All right. Vice Chair Phillips, do we have any additions or deletions?
Not tonight.
Great. And we do have public comment. So Arlene Webb, you are here. If you could please come on down. And, oh, fantastic. Come on down. There's a little button on the microphone there. You can press it. The green light will come on. You'll have 3 minutes. Great. And then if you could start by stating your name and your address or ward. And then when you have 1 minute left, you'll have a little yellow light. And then when your time is done, the red light will go on.
Thank you. Arlene Webb, 585 Winter Street, Northeast. So I live downtown. So I've been there 10 years. And my experience with homeless people is from them being my neighbors and having also had conversations with people, like if I'm at my car or something. The reason I came tonight is I saw the grant for the most vulnerable and some other word they used to describe them. And I didn't know who you meant by that. So, I think are the ones that are the ones most vulnerable, the ones that are like the most psychotic, that yell for hours at night. Are they the ones that are doing drugs? Are they the ones that have been homeless, living in those camps and running those camps and sometimes raping people for years? Because I know those things happen. Those people don't make good neighbors. I don't want you to move them into my apartment building because they're already way far gone. And I think of the most vulnerable maybe are the ones that have just become homeless, because the longer they're homeless, they're going to get traumatized real fast being out on the streets. And so let's get them. That would be my recommendation or my thought. That's my thought, is to have a couple pronged approach here where, we put more money into the ones that are just becoming homeless, and that money will go further, and they still might be acceptable to live in a regular public place, where the ones that are in a different reality than most of us are really not. They don't make good neighbors because they don't just change. And so that's kind of from my experience there. And I think that was everything. And I know it's complicated, and thank you for what you do.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming down and speaking with us. Stick around. We'll be talking about this more during this meeting and throughout the night. So thank you. All righty. Vice Chair, do we have a motion for the consent calendar?
I move the consent calendar.
Can you turn on your...
Thank
yeah,
you.
There you go.
I move the consent calendar, which consists of 3.1A, the September 25, 2023 draft Salem Housing Authority minutes. It does not include 3.2A, which was pulled by Commissioner Gwynn.
Perfect. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you so much. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, would the recorder please call the roll?
Commissioner Gonzalez?
Aye.
Commissioner Hoy?
Aye.
Commissioner Nordyke?
Aye.
Commissioner Varney?
Aye.
Commissioner Nishioka?
Aye.
Vice Chair Phillips?
Aye.
Commissioner Gwynn?
Aye.
Resident Commissioner Villegas absent. Chair Stapleton?
Aye. Motion passes. Thank you so much. All right, moving right along. We don't have any resolutions or public hearings, but we now do have a special order of business. Commissioner Gwynn, would you like to make a motion?
Yes, I move that we approve the attached grant agreement between the Housing Authority of the City of Salem and the City of Salem to provide $625,000 of committed funds to the Housing Authority for homeless rental assistance.
Thank you.
Second.
Great. Moved by Commissioner Gwynn, seconded by Phillips. All right. Would you like to speak to your motion?
I was hoping that Nicole would speak to these funds, kind of where they came from and what you guys do with them and how your program works.
Good evening, I'm Nicole Hughes. I'm the Housing Administrator for Salem Housing Authority. Thank you for bringing attention to this topic. I do want to say that there has been some confusion related to the titling of it being the Homeless Rental Assistance Program. And we did bring a report last year about sunsetting this program. We do still have recipients of the Homeless Rental Assistance Program on our caseload currently. We fully intend that that program will completely sunset in June of 2024. But through the years from 2017 to today, we have scaled back this program and are in the process of sunsetting completely the name Homeless Rental Assistance Program, phasing it out into the Special Programs Team, which you'll see in your program management report, all that the Special Program Team commits to out in the community. This team of individuals is 4 staff members, full-time employees. It also includes $100,000 in barrier removal assistance. That is a common terminology that's used in the housing industry for items such as driver's license, birth certificates, utility bills. There's a lot of deposits, application fees, and various other things that come along with that. And then some administrative costs, including our transportation costs, which is the vehicles, the safety equipment, and safety gear that the staff need to go out into the camps. This team has been instrumental to the Salem Livability team, the SOS team out in the camps. They also work with Salem Police, Salem Fire, and code and compliance teams on a regular basis. They collaboratively work together to come up with solutions, creative and innovative, and work with our coordinated entry system with ARCHES to ensure that we can find solutions for individuals to make that stepping stone to stability. For the public comment, those individuals that are typically served are homeless, more chronically homeless, which means in typically 3 to 5 years. Some can be upwards of 10 to 20 that we do find out there. The individuals do need to be able to get through the paperwork process, which is one of the most complicated. Housing and urban development doesn't have the easiest. They're very regulated and compliance-driven documents. So a lot of the goal of this team is to find individuals, come up with solutions, and then help them through the paperwork process to make that happen. If you don't have transportation needs and you don't have resources to understand all of the documents, they take the time. They have wonderful patients. They're trauma-informed. They've worked with individuals in this program for a very long time and have been very, very successful. There is some data each month that is now included in the program management report that includes the efforts that they do each month. But our number one goal is to continue this through. And we are supplementing this program with additional funds from the emergency order of Governor Kotek. That includes $454,000 that is also going towards our Salem Housing Authority Rapid Rehousing project, which focuses on rehousing individuals that either can attain affordable housing without any assistance, or individuals who currently have a voucher in hand or can obtain affordable housing ongoing.
Great. Thank you for that recap. Do you want to add anything to that, Commissioner?
The only question that I wanted to ask is, you talked about stepping stones, and to the comment from the audience member, I think that, because you and I spoke earlier today, and folks
You said that this is a stepping stone. So there are expectations for behavior, and can you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely. So we work with various different partnerships. And one example that I gave you earlier was our ability to lease Yaquina Hall in 30 days. Many of our team members can make connections with either the micro shelters or Arches Inn, the Navigation Center, what we call the stepping stones in the continuum of care, which we feel are vital to our community. Those stepping stones helped us achieve lease up at Yaquina Hall much faster and more streamlined. And this team was instrumental in connecting and doing the paperwork. So typically, we would stabilize a building of that size, 52 units, in 90 days. We were able to open the doors on May 30th and have it fully leased by the end of June. That came in part with our partnerships in those stepping stones. Many of our referrals came from both Micro Shelter and Arches Inn, and they had that stepping stone at that continuum of care for a period of some of them 30 days, some of them up to 6 months to a year before they were referred over to Yaquina Hall. That helped those individuals stabilize and set the groundwork for what is a lease, what is rules, and how to continue to stabilize long term. For the team, if the team hadn't been there to help individuals navigate all of our paperwork, the unsurmountable amount of move-ins that occurred during that time, remove barriers to make the move-ins smooth and effective. That sometimes even includes just a set of pot of pans or a broom or a mop to care for their apartment. They quickly and swiftly helped all 52 households. Each one of them had an interview. They were given each individualized time to ensure that we could remove any barriers to getting them stabilized into that building. That's a scenario that I was using earlier to help depict that, yes, we all do have, these are housing first models, but there are clear expectations at each of these stepping stones.
Great, thank you. Is there, yes, Commissioner Hoy?
Thank you. Nicole, if you would, I think the general public struggles some with accountabilities or a lack of, the perception of a lack of accountabilities for folks receiving these services. Can you just talk a little bit about that, about what's their part in this?
We absolutely talk about compassion with accountability at our agency ongoing. If we don't have a sense of accountability and start stabilizing into that, we're not setting individuals up for success into being able to move with their project-based vouchers or vouchering program into long-term sustainable housing. Those stepping stones happen out in outreach work and in camps, setting expectations. That may be one document a week. That may be one commitment to fulfill in a period of time. That may be handing a trash bag and expectations that they keep their camp in a clean and orderly fashion that's easily picked up if needed. We also, our agency in itself does not hand out tents because our goal is housing and we have a housing focus to it. So we are trying to encourage individuals into any of our community sheltering programs, into our stepping stones in the continuum of care, such as Arches Inn, Navigation Center, micro shelters, and then onward into places such as Sequoia, which we will open the doors the end of January of 2024. Each of those require a level of accountability. You have to sign lease agreements. You have to provide documentation. We have quiet hours at all of these locations. We have basic landlord functions and duties of the peaceful enjoyment of others, and those expectations are at all of our stepping stones along the way.
Great question. Yeah, Commissioner Gwynn.
I just wanted to say thank you for your amazing work and thank you for your amazing team.
Thank you.
Great. I don't see anybody else with any questions. Would the recorder please call the roll?
Commissioner Hoy.
Aye.
Commissioner Nordyke.
Aye.
Commissioner Varney.
Aye.
Commissioner Nishioka.
Aye.
Vice Chair Phillips.
Aye.
Commissioner Gwynn.
Aye.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Aye.
Resident Commissioner Villegas absent, Chair Stapleton.
Aye, motion passes. Thank you so much, everybody. And again, tell the team, great work. We're really excited about all the work that team does going out into the camps. It's really a unique person who can do that work. And
Yes.
so we're all cheering them on and very thankful for them.
Definitely.
All right, we have an information report. Again,
Yes.
it was a delight to read. Would you mind giving us a recap?
Absolutely. So I wanted to draw some highlights that are also not included on this report. So Sequoia Crossings pictured on the front, as you can see it's well underway. It's really shaping in progress. It's about 80% complete as it stands now. We are also in line for electrical gear, which is a challenge in this market and industry right now. We are hoping that it does arrive in November. It hasn't been delayed as we know at this point. That will hopefully streamline us into a grand opening event that we're starting the planning for possibly the second week in January. So look forward to having everybody out to enjoy this beautiful project where we talk about this one as a true trauma-informed inspiration that we have learned from Redwood Crossings, we've learned from Yaquina and many of our other buildings that we have built to design this for longevity, to help with the calmness, to provide the services on site, ease of access, eyesight, line of sights, delivering a product that has things to do at the location, and hopefully stabilizing our residents so that they can move up and out of Sequoia Crossings into other housings as they feel that time is ready for them to do. Sequoia Crossings is permanent supportive housing. That does tend to get confused with transitional housing. Sequoia is permanent supportive housing. We find individuals that stay there 12 months, 24 months, sometimes they need 5 years. That program is designed to help individuals achieve that status at the point that they're ready to do. So we look forward to having everybody out. We spoke about the budget for the Homeless Rental Assistance Program is now called the Special Programs Team. We do call them at our agency now the Special Programs Outreach Team, and we will fade out the Homeless Rental Assistance Program. So I do want to apologize again. I will make sure that terminology is not used into the future. The key difference in that is that we're not using city funds to do any of the rental assistance. We're achieving that through either the stepping stones in the continuum of care or through our federal funding dollars for the vouchering programs through project-based vouchers, enhancing vouchers, mainstream vouchers, many of our enhanced programs that this agency has been able to apply and achieve in results in getting. I did want to take note into our program management report that we had in the last month. We've infused $2.4 million to the local Salem and Kaiser community through our voucher payments. If you can imagine what that's like in an accounting department to ensure all those payments are made at the first of every month to all the different landlords throughout the town. And that's just a snapshot of what they do in a month's time. So we do want to spread kudos to them as well. We did focus this last month on Hands and Words Are Not for Hurting, which is, I know that the city did a proclamation for that event or for that nonprofit at the last meeting. I have had the pleasure of getting to know Ann Kelly and her team and spreading that word throughout our agency and to our residents and to the community. We find that very impactful for the work that we do. We also have staff that face harsh words at times and disrespect. And so I know that at the hospital it can be challenging too, and I know that's a good focus of theirs, and we're so happy to spread that word into our properties as well. We have had magnets go out with our leases this month so that they can have that reminder, and all of our staff that have participated in the pledge, you'll see the mural at our lobby door. So we also, for many of you know, we have the Yaquina Hall lights that have the capability of changing on the exterior. They were changed for purple for this previous week as well. We have been received the privilege of getting our Shop with a Cop announcement, and so we're working to quickly locate 420 children from our sites, which is not difficult to do with the amount of children we serve. We're looking forward to that event in December. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions from folks? I had a couple, but I will hold back if others have things. I wanted to just kind of zero in on page 12 in the report. You have an update on inspections. And I won't lie, I got a little hot under the collar when I was reading this. I had to, let my kids know that mom is elevated because of this report I'm reading, not because of their behavior. For those of you who don't have this report in front of you, it really is talking about the amount of inspections that you all do in the units that are leased to our clients, and the amount of them that fail for various reasons, and the amount that need repeated inspection in order to get those problems fixed before they can continue on at a certain level of standard of living. So I asked you a couple of questions in an email today, asking, why are the reasons that they're failing? That's not necessarily in here, and that really helped me understand the issues. And is this snapshot of this month, is this typical for us to experience? Are the folks that we're having issues with as far as landlords, are they in state, out of state? What are the hurdles there in maybe communication or outreach? And then do we have any fees or fines that go along with a failed inspection? So I was wondering if maybe you could give a recap so that everybody can kind of come up to speed on this.
Sure, you'll see the numbers that are listed in the report. That is what we have been seeing as a trend since the COVID-19 pandemic and our mass catch-up of all of the inspections. For many that don't know, that the moratorium HUD had in place was that we only did emergency or new voucher inspections. So there was a period of time that units were on a moratorium, as well as our properties that we manage and maintain. We've also gone through a bit of this where we've had to do a lot of catch up from those days to ensure that all the work orders are complete. What we're seeing is that this trend is continuing on, and it is a bit bothersome and it's very time consuming. We have 2 housing inspectors that do this phenomenal work and have to go out for repeat inspections regularly. My biggest concern is related to things such as stove and oven items with deficiencies, or electrical related, which can also lead to more issues in the apartment. But the most bothersome is the smoke detectors. Smoke detectors are life-saving measures that quickly alert our households when they need to get out of the units, and it's probably one of our most common fail items that we're having to return on. We have tried many ways of addressing and trying to help our landlords. If it is simply a light bulb, a battery, or something simple that is going to fail that unit, we have that equipment in our vehicles and we'll help them out and work to get that corrected immediately. What we are seeing is that sometimes we're having to go out once, not once, but twice or 2 or 3 times. We do have a level that we can take. It's abating the rent in an apartment, but that affects our voucher holder, and ultimately they have to move. So our number 1 goal is to negotiate with the landlord to try to get those repairs completed, not to have to uproot a household and have them move to a qualified unit because the inventory is very, very low. There's challenges with that, with security deposits and application costs. But we have had to take actions to abate units, and we currently, I was just looking this up, we have 13 currently under abatement right now. They're set to start abating the rent on November 1st. They'll have 90 days to correct that before the lease is terminated completely. There are measures in place that we do take to address this, but the ultimate outcome is the family that's living in these units would have to move. So we see a variety of both in-state and out-of-state landlords that are having these issues. Some of them are big, some of them are small. We are working with 3 currently that our Section 8 manager has done a phenomenal job where she's starting to go out on site and have meetings with various different landlords who are not either complying with signing the housing choice voucher for payments or for failed inspections. We are working with Salem Rental Housing Association to try to do more education. We are working to try to get landlord luncheons at our agency where landlords can come and ask questions. We can educate them on these different variety of things. And then our phenomenal inspection team has created flyers that we're also including in mailers and trying to get the word out much quicker.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I feel like we're kind of just caught in a rock and a hard place, right? Because we can't push too hard because the rental market is the way that it is. And even though folks legally cannot discriminate against a voucher holder, there are other ways that they can get around that. And yet, folks are living in subpar and maybe even unsafe conditions. So that gets me upset. I don't know about anybody else. But I would love to talk to you more about this offline. I don't know if there's anything we can do, and I think maybe that's why I'm so frustrated with this. But I am excited to hear that you are working with education groups, and luncheons seem like a good step to go in. And again, thank you to your inspection teams for the work that they do. I really do appreciate all their work.
Thank you.
Is there any other questions? Yes, Commissioner Gwynn.
Do you know how many of those failed inspections are because of the smoke alarm?
I don't have the exact number. We were digging feverishly today. I do want to also notify everybody that we are in the middle of a software conversion. So we'll happily get that numbers and additional information, but we are right in the mix of converting all of that data, and over the course of the November, we will see some delays in our agency for response likely.
Do you think maybe in December or January you could, hopefully when everything goes smoothly with your transfer, I've lived through those before, they're not fun, maybe you could give us an update on this information and maybe kind of list out the different reasons why folks are failing and kind of the percentages of return visits and abatement and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
I think that would that be helpful for everybody?
That would definitely
Seen
give
some
us enough
numbers.
time to, thank
Okay.
you.
Great. Is there any other questions? Okay, seeing none, we are adjourned.
I'll call to order this meeting of the Urban Renewal Agency for the City of Salem for Monday, October 23rd, 2023. If the recorder will please call the roll.
Board Member Stapleton.
I'm here.
Board Member Nishioka.
Here.
Board Member Phillips.
Here.
Board Member Gwynn.
Here.
Board Member Gonzalez.
Here.
Board Member Hoy.
Here.
Board Member Nordijk.
Here.
Board Member Varney.
Here.
Chair Hoy.
Here. Excuse me. Councilor Stapleton, do we have any additions or deletions to the agenda?
Not tonight.
All right. Do we have anybody signed up for public comment? Nobody signed up for public comment for the Urban Renewal Agency. Councilor Stapleton, the consent calendar.
Thank you. I move approval of the consent calendar.
Second.
Motion by Stapleton, second by Phillips. Councilor, to your motion.
Thank you. The consent calendar tonight consists of item 3.1A, the September 25th, 2023 draft urban renewal agency minutes, and that concludes the consent calendar.
Is there any discussion? Will the recorder please call the roll?
Board Member Hoy.
Aye.
Board Member Nordijk.
Aye.
Board Member Varney.
Aye.
Board Member Stapleton.
Aye.
Board Member Nishioka.
Aye.
Board Member Phillips?
Aye.
Board Member Gwynn?
Aye.
Board Member Gonzalez?
Aye.
Chair Hoy.
Aye, motion passes. We have no public hearings, no special orders of business, and no information reports, so we are adjourned. All right. Call to order this meeting of the Salem City Council for Monday, October 23rd, 2023 to order. Will the recorder please call the roll?
Counselor Stapleton?
I'm here.
Counselor Nishioka?
I'm still here.
Counselor Phillips?
Here.
Counselor Gwynn?
Here.
Counselor Gonzalez?
Here.
Counselor Hoy?
Here.
Counselor Nordyke?
Here.
Counselor Varney?
Here.
Mayor Hoy.
Here. All right. Counselor Stapleton, do we have any additions or deletions to the agenda?
We do have one revision for item 5.B. It's a sorry. Do I need to make a motion for a revision? No.
No, it's just
I?
it's an information report or something, I think.
Yeah.
So, oh,
I do.
we do need a motion.
I was right. All right, I move that we include the revision to item 5.B.
I'll second that.
Motion by Stapleton, second by Nishioka. Counselor, to your motion.
Thank you. Yes, staff revised our, the process for selecting projects for the pedestrian crossing and sidewalk infill replacement program for the bond. And I would like us to all to have the same information.
Any further discussion? Will the recorder please call the roll?
Counselor Nishioka?
Aye.
Counselor Phillips?
Aye.
Counselor Gwynn?
Aye.
Counselor Gonzalez?
Aye.
Counselor Hoy?
Aye.
Counselor Nordyke?
Aye.
Counselor Varney?
Aye.
Counselor Stapleton?
Aye.
Mayor Hoy.
Aye. Motion passes.
Mayor, I'm wondering, could we find out what's changed about this?
Certainly.
Dan Atchison, City Attorney, I can speak to that. Essentially, the addition of Commercial Street was added to the recommendation. There was discussion in the report about it. The dollar amount didn't change. It was just one of the items on the report.
Great, thank you.
All right. It is now time for council and city manager comment. Do we have any? Councilor Nordyke.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and City Council and those watching at home. Nearly a dozen children have overdosed on fentanyl since June in the city of Portland. The Portland police said 10 minors have overdosed since June, and half of those incidents were fatal. And fentanyl is impacting every single community around our state. There's also a real threat of counterfeit pills. Over 1.3 million have been seized by the Oregon and Idaho high-intensity drug trafficking area report. Now, under state law, local governments like this one cannot prohibit the public consumption of controlled substances. We cannot stop the public consumption of fentanyl on a public street or a public alley. We can, however, call on our lawmakers to address the opioid crisis before more lives are lost. And we can take steps here at City Hall to ban the use of controlled substances like fentanyl and opioids within our public spaces when we have the power to do so. And in order to do that, we can change our city code. We can address the fact that there is open usage of meth, heroin, fentanyl, and synthetic fentanyl. And by doing so, we can improve public health outcomes for everyone, most importantly, our children who do not understand the difference between a fentanyl pill and an aspirin. It'll also expand the ability for our public safety officials to take action in situations of open use. So what we can do is make an amendment to our own code. So if and when the state law changes, we will have a code ready to go on the books to take effect immediately for us to do the things that we currently cannot do. We cannot have our hands untied just yet, but we can change our code to make it ready to do so. Currently, under city code, you cannot drink in a public street or an alley or a public way without being a licensed premise, like a bar or a restaurant. What we could do is work with our city attorney's office to amend this law to read, not only are you not allowed to consume alcohol, you're not allowed to consume controlled substances in our public streets, alleys, or public ways. We can work with our city government to make this happen, and we can have a law, again, ready to go if and when the state changes and addresses the opioid crisis that we see right now. And we can be very thoughtful about this, too. We can be aware of the fact that many people have prescription drugs. This is not about taking away prescription drugs from people with a lawful prescription. This is not about that at all. This is about addressing the fact that fentanyl is killing people. It's killing young people. I talked to a Salem health representative. They have a phenomenon where children are born in withdrawal from fentanyl. So this affects everyone, including the most vulnerable among us. So I am working with our city attorney, and I'll be bringing a motion back to council after I've had an opportunity to share input on that. But really, I want us to do what we can within our power to be ready when the state law changes. If the state law changes, we can do something about fentanyl right here in our own town. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there additional Councillor comments? Councillor Hoy.
Councillor Nordyke, I cannot thank you enough for what you just had to say. I think it's vital, and I've been banging a gong for a while now on that, so thank you for that. My comments tonight were sparked by an experience last night in the restaurant. My husband and I own a restaurant here in town, and a server walked by me quickly and said, "So now we let the homeless use the phone during the dinner rush?" And I thought, what's going on? So I went up front toward the phone, and sure enough, a gentleman was sitting on our waiting bench, and he had our line 1 in his hand. And I walked up and I said, "Are you about done with that?" And he said, "I'm on the phone with my mom." This was a man in his late 30s, probably. I couldn't tell if he was homeless, but he did appear to be on something major. And suddenly my mind went to his mother's home. I've seen other mothers do whatever they can to try to help their addicted children. I've seen families turned inside out by the actions of people who are on these very drugs that you're speaking of. So my question is, what about the rest of the family? What about the rest of our community who's not on these substances, who's not creating chaos, but have been somehow forced to roll, to assimilate with that which should never have been? While my heart breaks for the unhoused, I truly pray for those who want help so they can get it without delay. Councillor Nordyke, thank you again. I look forward, and I'll help you in any way I can.
Additional comments? Councillor Nishioka.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to make a statement about a recent loss that we have had here in the city. Ron Ekus, a steward of civic life in Salem and former utility regulator, known for his bulldog-like tenacity, died from a heart condition on Saturday, October 14th, while hiking in Bhutan. He was 76. I will miss Ron for a very long time. I have the honor of assisting with Ron's Celebration of Life service, and I will update you when I have more information. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Ron was a friend. I first became aware of him during my internship in college. He was a state legislator, and I was an intern in the state senate, and first became aware of him then. And here we are, I don't even know how many years ago that was, 30-something years ago. And yeah. It's a big loss for our community, for sure. He was also a member of our planning commission. So, thank you. Additional comments? Councillor Phillips.
I just wanted to thank Public Works Director Brian Martin and Mark Bechtel for taking me on a tour of Garrett Island this afternoon. That's our water treatment facility. I've been trying to go for the last 2.5 years, and we finally got the schedule to work out. There are a lot of hats that we wear as city councilors and members of this body. I've had the privilege to serve on the wastewater subcommittee, and getting safe, clean drinking water to our residents is a big deal. I think that it became kind of top of mind for all of us after the cyanotoxin scare in 2018, and seeing the investment and the work of our dedicated public works employees and the leadership, and seeing the investment that the state legislature has made with the ozone treatment facility. My schedule didn't allow me to go to the opening ceremony, so seeing it up and functional, it's really cool. And my background is I'm an emergency room doctor here, and my undergraduate degree is in biology, and I minored in math, chemistry, and physics. So kind of getting to nerd out and asking some of those questions was
Is
really,
that all?
it was really fun today.
Wow.
And our water, just consistently with these investments that we've made, the testing, numbers that we have are just fantastic. So I know that I was concerned about that before serving on council, and it's nice to see when things do work and when the community and the region comes together to support our community. So I really appreciate the time. I think most of the other councilors have gone, but I was one of the last to go, so I was so grateful for that time. It was a good experience.
Thank you, Councilor. Are there additional comments? Well, I would just like to say I had the pleasure last week of traveling to Eugene with Deputy City Manager Namburi and also our Strategic Initiatives Manager Courtney Knox-Bush. And we attended the kickoff for the Sustainable Cities Year with the University of Oregon. It was a great event, and we got to hear from all of the professors who will be working on issues and challenges that we have here in the city of Salem for this next year. They are devoting a lot of energy and resources to the issues that we're struggling with, and I'm really excited with it. I came away from that event just really jazzed. It was so great to hear about their plans from all of the different schools and the different areas who are going to be working on these problems, and I think it's going to be a great program. So I would encourage you all to really keep up on that and follow the progress. It's going to be amazing. So I don't know what you're saying.
I said, and let's thank Courtney for all the work she's done to get ready for that.
Yes, Courtney has done an amazing job to get us ready for that and to prepare us for success. So yeah, thank you for mentioning that. Any additional comments? All right. It is time for proclamations. I would like to invite up Councilor Nordyke, and I would also like to invite up Thomas Golden, the Polio Plus Chair from Rotary District 5100, to receive the proclamation.
Thank you. Testing 1, 2, 3. Okay. Thank you and good evening, everyone. And thank you, Tom, fellow Rotarian, for being here. I have the honor of reading off the proclamation tonight. Whereas World Polio Day, October 24th, is a day when Rotarians and individuals around the globe focus on eradicating polio from the world. And whereas when Rotary initiated Polio Plus to eradicate polio in 1985, 1,000 cases a day were reported in 125 countries. In 2023, only 7 cases of wild polio have been reported in a very small mountainous region of Afghanistan and Pakistan. And whereas health leaders from the Center of Disease Control and Prevention and the World Health Organization indicate that 2023 has the real possibility of interrupting wild polio so that the world would be certified polio-free in 2026. And second to last, whereas when we stop polio, we also prevent post-polio syndrome that affects 25 to 40% of polio survivors 15 to 40 years later. And whereas In raising awareness of polio, we stop a disease that is entirely preventable so that no child anywhere will be crippled for life. Now, I, therefore, on behalf of Chris Hoy, Mayor of the City of Salem, do hereby proclaim October 24th, 2023 as World Polio Day to raise awareness of the life-saving vaccine and encourage all to join in this observance. Thank you. Would you like to say a few words?
Well, I'd just like to thank the City of Salem for their support in raising awareness for in polio. As we've heard, many people have effects of post-polio syndrome, so needless to say, when we stop polio, we stop post-polio syndrome. So we have a real opportunity, and just for every dollar that's given, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation matches that 2 to 1, and so together we have the real possibility of ending polio. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Counselor, for reading that proclamation. Polio and post-polio syndrome is an issue that's near and dear to my heart, as I had a family member who suffered from post-polio syndrome for many years, and I watched him struggle with that. So yeah, let's hope we can get it eradicated. All right, we are on to public comment. So first up, we have a remote comment from Michael Nolly. As a reminder, you have 3 minutes. Watch the timer there on your screen.
I'm sorry, Mayor. He did join the meeting and then left, and he may rejoin. We're still waiting to see. So if there's anyone else that signed up for in person, I would go ahead with those. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So we will go on to the in-person folks. First up is Jimmy Jones. Come on up to the microphone, hit the button to turn the mic on. Please be sure and introduce yourself with either your address or your ward. And you have 3 minutes. The yellow light will blink when you have 1 minute remaining, and then red light will come on when your time is up.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. For the record, my name is Jimmy Jones. I'm the executive director of the Mid-Willamette Valley Community Action Agency here in Salem. We serve primarily Marion and Polk counties, and I'm also a recent arrival in Ward 3, and having moved to Salem a couple of months ago. So that was a long time coming. I'm here to speak tonight just to very briefly talk about agenda item 3.3A in support of the Salem Housing Authority and the grant agreement that's in front of you this evening. I have worked with Shaw for going on 8 years now. And that is one of the most professional run, best outfits in the entire state. Sometimes I don't think our local entities get enough credit, but I work with housing authorities across Oregon, and there is no better one than the Salem Housing Authority and what they will do with the resources that you provide them this evening. I know that it is very difficult right now to find money anywhere. And a lot of the consequences of exiting the COVID pandemic and finding resources to do critical work has been very difficult. But I do appreciate the council's support of the Housing Authority and the tremendous work they've done for the past decade on the homeless crisis here in Salem. And this will be money well invested. We have probably the closest partnership of any community action agency with any housing authority in Oregon. And if you can remember 5 years ago, and you can remember the struggles that we had in the downtown in particular in Salem, certainly all of those problems have not been solved, but a lot of them are trending in the right direction because of the tremendous work that the Housing Authority has done. And before I go, Mr. Mayor, I'd also like to express my personal gratitude to you for all the work you've done, quiet work in some cases, but very effective work in order to fight for the dignity and safety of our homeless population and to go out and demand that adequate resources be brought into this community to face some of the issues this winter that we're addressing. That has been noticed, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael Talbert. I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Hey, Jimmy, could you come back up to the microphone? Councilor Gwynn had a question, and I did not see her hand. Councilor, go ahead.
I wasn't fast enough. So I've actually been waiting for this opportunity to tell you. I don't know if you know it, but I have volunteered down at Arches, working in the kitchen 4 different Sundays. For 3 of those days that I was there, I didn't tell them that I was a city councilor. So it was a very humbling, awesome experience. But what I wanted you to speak to is what I didn't know. The funds that you guys get for food. So where does that come from?
Much of that actually, thank you for the question, Councilor. Much of that actually comes from the Marion Polk Food Share. And I would also express to the community that it's a very difficult time for food shares, food banks across the state of Oregon right now. Many of them are operating from deficits, and even here locally, we've had to prioritize in terms of what the food share can actually cover, given the incredible demand for food that we're experiencing right now. So we get a lot of it from the food share. A lot of it's donated as well. We buy a little bit here and there from various grant sources where we can. It's never quite enough, but we're doing everything we can to get as much as we can and to folks who need it.
Like I said, I've worked in that kitchen, and you guys do amazing things there.
Thank you. We're trying very hard. It's very difficult work, as you can see.
Thank you. Thank you, Jimmy, for your great work. Michael Talbert. There you go.
I pushed the right button.
You did. You're great.
Okay, hello, my name is Michael Talbert. I am an ordained elder at Salem First Presbyterian Church, and we host the largest warming shelter in downtown Salem on the corner of Chemeketa and Winters Street. It is unique if you take three characteristics into consideration. One is its size. The other is that we are low barrier. Everybody over the age of 18 is welcome, and as well as with their animals and so forth. So and we are well known by that community. We are deeply concerned because whether or not the city is prepared to deal with the warming season this year. Last year, there was a death. That was prominent. We are concerned that if we can't open that shelter, there will be people showing up anyway because we have been there forever. We are well known and well, let's say, frequented by the homeless population. I believe we make up 60% of the warming beds available in the city. We are very supportive of all the work that's being done to tackle homelessness through the Housing Administration and everything. However, this is an incredibly vulnerable population, and unless steps are taken immediately, we're talking about in a couple of weeks, we can start preparing for very bad news. So that's it. This is be forewarned, a serious problem. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak on this.
Thank you, Mr. Talbert. I really appreciate your words. I very much appreciate you opening the church for our warming network. I volunteered there several times, and it's always a very rewarding experience. And I echo everything you just said in terms of the urgency. I had a conversation with Governor Kotek just last week on this very topic and explained to her the urgency here in Salem. And so I know we have her attention. I know she's working on it. And we're doing everything we can to make sure that that gets opened up on time. I was even contacted yesterday morning by a reporter, and I gave up my I delayed a trip to visit family just so I could highlight this issue on the Portland News Channel. So, yeah, it's one that's near and dear to my heart, and one that I'm doing everything I can to make sure that we get on top of. Councilor Stapleton.
Yeah, I have two questions. Well, not a question. I wanted to thank you for your work. I have also served down at your warming shelter, and it is very well run and welcoming and really a place of peace.
We have to also give credit to our partners in this at Arches. I don't want to overlook that.
Yes.
Sure.
But maybe Mayor, could you explain to folks like what's happening with the money? Because I don't think everybody always knows what's happening.
I wish Jimmy hadn't left because he's truly the expert, but here's what I understand. So the city, we provide $150,000 to our warming network, and we're continuing to do that. But we have traditionally in Salem relied mostly on a volunteer network. The pandemic sort of changed that, where we had to rely on a paid staff program rather than a volunteer program, which of course requires more money. The state of Oregon stepped up, and the Oregon Housing and Community Services stepped up and helped fund that program. But this year, for a reason that is still not clear to me, it may be clear to others, but it's not clear to me, they redirected the money that had been directed for warming, they directed it to another program. And so our local network is stuck with just the $150,000 that the city of Salem provides, which is not enough to run our warming network for the year. And so We are trying very hard to get the state to redirect that money back to the warming network. And it's not just an issue here in Salem, it's an issue across the state for every community that runs a warming network. And I'm looking to Ms. Bennett to make sure to fact check me. She's giving me 2 thumbs up. So that's the situation.
Thank you.
If I may just make one other comment,
Sure.
and that is one of the most fundamental problems facing in this area is the assumption that houselessness is the problem. And if we just focus on getting houses, the problem will go away. It will not. There's a certain percentage of the homeless that will stay on the streets for whatever set of reasons, and they're not going to leave. And the idea, and we need to begin to look at them not as a problem that needs to be fixed, but realize that they are in fact another community within our community, and we need to be prepared to serve them. Our church is not interested in cleaning up the streets. Our church is interested in giving compassionate care to the people who need it, where they need it, the way they are, and what they need. And the city needs to understand, and all of the other services around here need to understand, these folks will not move into apartments. These folks are where they are, and we have to meet them where they are and protect them because they are our beloved brothers and sisters. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark Wigg.
Good evening. I'm Mark Wigg. I'm in Ward 2, and thank all of you for serving your community. I was pleased to see that an increase in the rental assistance program was on the agenda. Helping people stay and find a home is the first step in solving the homeless crisis. Related to that, I would like the city to be a strong supporter of home sharing. The nonprofit Home Share Oregon project is helping connect people wanting to share their homes with renters. Sharing homes helps people reduce their costs, increase their welfare, and it helps people stay in their homes and increases our housing stock. So Home Share Oregon, it's just starting in Salem. Let's pump it up. I also want to encourage the city to develop and manage RV and trailer parks. Millions of people live year-round in RVs and trailers. It is the least expensive way to be housed. Every year, the city confiscates dozens of RVs and trailers and then pays thousands of dollars to demolish those. These were people's homes, and taking and demolishing the trailers and motorhomes and RVs is depleting our housing stock. Developing RV parks is the quickest way to increase our housing stock by significant amounts, hundreds and hundreds. Developing RV parks adjacent to new parklands, such as around gravel pits in West Salem and South Lancaster, could be a benefit to everybody in this city. We have thousands of people living without shelter in Oregon's cold, rainy winters. We don't have the money or time to construct apartments for all these people. Developing RV parks is the quickest and least expensive way to provide safe, dry homes for our neighbors in need.
Thank you, Mark. I can tell you that I have met with the executive director of Home Share. I'm very supportive of that program. We just don't have cash to give to them at this time, but we're very supportive, and we've connected them in with the Homeless Alliance to try to get them more resources and connected into more services. So I agree with you that that's a great service. I do just need to correct you on one thing. We're not out there destroying a bunch of motorhomes. The only time that we will dismantle a motorhome is if it's truly no longer habitable. These are really hazardous, unhealthy vehicles. Those are the only ones that we're dealing with.
They may have not gotten to that point of being uninhabitable if they were in an RV park.
Maybe. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I understand Mr. Nolly is back with us online. If you are,
Yes.
please. Yes, it's your turn. You have 3 minutes. If you'd introduce yourself and either your address or your ward for the record, please.
My name is Mike Nolly. I'm a current community member living in Ward 1. And I'm talking in support of HRAP, whose 83% success rate speaks to the basic utility of Housing First initiatives. And thank you for everybody else who's commented and for the decision. And additionally, I would like to offer my perspective on providing housing to those who have been described as service resistant. First of all, there are studies suggesting that the notion of service resistance could be a myth to some extent, rooted in the long wait times associated with housing programs and the relative difficulty of applying for them. A 2019 study by the NYU Silver School of Social Work, led by Deborah Paget, studied 43 unhoused New York City residents as they attempted to apply for housing. They found that, quoting Paget, "In the process of trying to secure safe permanent housing, there's almost no light at the end of the tunnel, and little to be gained by cooperation when the results are so disappointing. In this context, homeless people are not service resistant. They are rational actors, all too familiar with unkept promises." I can confirm some of these findings from my own personal experience with homeless people in the Salem area. In working with the homeless, I found that they were largely not service resistant, but abandoned by family, unloved, and often suffering from drug dependency, and perplexed by the complexity of applications and separate services, the best of which had long wait times and for which there were numerous chances to fail. They also had other complicating factors which made it difficult for them to get services. One individual I knew, named Steve Rogers, was probably among the top 5 so-called service-resistant homeless individuals at that time in the Salem area. He was disabled with type 1 diabetes, had no toes, and was completely blind. He was also psychologically disturbed, hostile, and dependent upon marijuana. I helped him move into my apartment with my landlord's permission and very kind support, and we were successful in stabilizing his medical condition and at least minimizing the number of ambulance rides he used during the time he was housed, amounting to probably millions of dollars saved. The attempt to stabilize Steve in the long term was ultimately unsuccessful because he first burned out a kitchen due to his blindness and lack of a good caregiver and lack of an accessible fire extinguisher, and then he died the next year after refusing dialysis treatment, in large part due to the depression that suffered from the loss of family and friends and caregivers due to his stubbornness and psychotic episodes. He never got into the HRAP program because of complex problems with his eligibility, particularly because he failed out of previous public housing. I'm not sure if it was even the right program for him. I would simply recommend that requirements for HRAP be somewhat loosened so that more of the enormous need can be met and more quickly, and that funds be allocated and resourced for this reason. I'm not suggesting housing programs be free of accountability, but have accountability that is fair, transparent, and generous with wraparound services that Steve needed and didn't get. In addition, I would recommend that Salem attempt to invest in social housing, mandate or continue to mandate social housing in new complexes, and resist calls to divest from the public housing models. Despite their bad reputation in the West, the reason for this appears to have been poor funding, political toxicity, and paradoxically income requirements, which have had the effect of centralizing poverty in one location. The city of Vienna has had a—
Mr. Nolly, I apologize, but your time has expired. Thank you for your testimony. All right, we are on to the consent calendar.
Thank you.
Councilor Stapleton.
Thank you. I move the consent calendar with the exception of item 3.3F, pulled by Councilor Gwynn.
Second.
Motion by Stapleton, second by Phillips. Councilor, to your motion.
Thank you. It's a lengthy one, so bear with me here. We have item 3.1A, the October 9th, 2023 draft city council minutes. Item 3.3A, the grant agreement between the Salem Housing Authority, the Housing Authority of the City of Salem and the City of Salem for the Homeless Rental Assistance Program. Item 3.3B, an application for funding under the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant Program issued by the U.S. Department of Energy. Item 3.3C, a ground lease with Watt EV Salem Inc. for real property at Salem Municipal Airport. Item 3.3D, a ground lease agreement with Aviation Properties Northwest LLC for real property at the Salem Municipal Airport. I feel like this is a trend. I like it. We should get more of those on here. Item 3.3E, the United States Department of Justice Edward Bryan Memorial Justice Assistant Grant for federal fiscal year 2023. Did I read that right? It's a grant. It's helpful. We're glad it's here. Item 3.3G, an agreement with Portland General Electric Company to install electric vehicle chargers on PGE-owned poles located in the public right-of-way. And item 3.3H, the Critical Oregon Airport Relief Grant applications. And that concludes the consent calendar.
Thank you, Counselor. I'm super excited about like 4 of these different
I
things.
know.
I mean, we're getting an electric truck charging station at our airport. We have Metal Innovations relocating from Aurora down to our airport. And we're working with PGE to allow for charging stations on their utility poles that are in our right-of-way. I think those are amazing things. I'm super excited about lots of these things on our consent agenda. A lot of times it's just, you know, stuff that's not so interesting on the consent agenda, but these are all very exciting things. So thank you. Is there further discussion? Item F was, what, let me check my notes. Yes, item F was pulled. By Councillor Gwynn. That's the only item pulled. Further discussion? Will the recorder please call the roll?
Counselor Phillips.
Aye.
Counselor Gwynn. Aye. Counselor Gonzalez.
Aye.
Counselor Hoy.
Aye.
Counselor Nordike.
Aye.
Counselor Varney.
Aye.
Counselor Stapleton.
Aye.
Counselor Nishioka. Aye. Mayor Hoy.
Aye. Motion passes. All right. On to public hearings. Item 4A.
City Council will now conduct a public hearing concerning amending Salem Revised Code, Chapter 900 and Chapter 300. The criteria applicable to the proposed amendment is SRC 110.085B1 and 2. Testimony must be directed toward the identified criteria or other criteria the person believes to apply to the decision. The hearing will be conducted with a staff presentation first, followed by other interested persons. Neighborhood associations are limited to 5 minutes per association for testimony, and other individuals testifying are limited to 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll open a public hearing then. And just for the council's information, no members of the public have signed up. So I will turn it over to Aaron Panko. I don't think your microphone's on. There you go.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Hoy and members of council. My name is Aaron Panko with the Community Development Department. I'm here to talk to you tonight about the sign code. At this time, I'd like to enter into the record the staff report, including its attachments. And we have, not displaying the PowerPoint.
Do we have some intermission music to play?
Almost there.
Mr. Atchison is agreeing to hum some tunes for us.
All right,
you
looks
probably
like
can't
we
hear
can
him,
see
but he's
that.
already doing it in my ear.
All right. So the sign code received its last major update in 2012. In 2016, the Planning Commission initiated an amendment to the sign code proposing to eliminate the need for temporary sign permits, changing the method for measuring the brightness of electronic display signs, and a few other minor changes. However, primarily due to concerns regarding the lack of enforcement for temporary signs, the amendment was abandoned. In 2021, the Planning Division created a new sign inspector position responsible for enforcement of the sign code, including temporary signs. A series of 3 work sessions were held with the Planning Commission in 2022 to discuss proposed updates to the sign code. On February 28th, 2023, the proposed code amendment was initiated by the Planning Commission with the adoption of resolution number 23-01. Notice of the amendment was provided as required to the Department of Land Conservation and Development, to the public, and was published in the newspaper. Because the proposed code amendment restricts the development of new outdoor advertising signs in the MU3 zone, a ballot measure 56 notice was also provided to the owner of each affected property with that zoning designation. And
yet nobody signed up. Not one person signed up to comment.
We had a few for Planning Commission.
All right.
So the proposed amendment adds a new definition for complex, which will be used to replace current definitions for shopping center, office complex, and industrial complex. The new definition will be used to clarify how the sign code applies to sites that have a building that contains multiple businesses, and also for sites that have multiple buildings and structures that are designed to be functionally integrated. Updated definitions for different types of temporary signs was also part of the amendment, including balloons, banners, pennants, and rigid signs. We added a new definition and illustration for primary building wall, which will be useful in clarifying wall sign display area allowances. The side code currently exempts non-illuminated window signs that are painted or attached to the inside of a window. Staff is proposing a new limitation so that signs could not cover more than 20% of any window on a building facade that is within 30 feet of a public street. If the window is more than 30 feet back from the street, there would continue to be no limit on the amount of window area covered. The proposed code amendment will eliminate sign adjustments, sign variances, and sign conditional use permits. So sign adjustments in the current code allow for up to a 10% increase to the height or display surface allowance for a sign. And sign variances may be used to grant a greater deviation from an applicable standard of the Salem or of the sign code. But they require the applicant to demonstrate that there are unique or unusual physical conditions of the property. These processes are proposed to be removed from the sign code. However, adjustments or variances to the development standards of Chapter 900 could still be obtained following the similar adjustment and variance processes that the Salem Revised Code already provides for in Chapters 245 and 250. So on the left here, you'll see an example of an art installation at Willamette University. The art piece could not meet the applicable requirements for approval through the Public Arts Commission, which would have provided an exemption from the sign code. So planning staff, when we're reviewing signs, we cannot make content-based determinations and therefore can't distinguish between works of art and other types of signs. So because the art piece is visible from the right-of-way, we classified it as a sign. A sign code variance in this case was required. A public hearing was needed for this installation to increase the number of allowed freestanding signs for the campus. With the proposed code amendment, an administrative adjustment, which doesn't require the public hearing, could work in similar cases. Or if an adjustment couldn't work, the variance process could also be requested. Signed conditional use permits are proposed for removal and will be replaced with additional development standards related to hours of illumination and separation requirements, requiring a minimum distance of 100 feet for illuminated signs that are visible from adjacent residential zones. So the example photo shown on the right is an electronic display sign that could potentially be found in a residential zone that the current code would require a signed conditional use permit for. So with the updated standards, a sign permit could be obtained for this without the conditional use permit and public hearing process. But the sign would still be subject to those additional development standards which limit the impact on residential areas. The updates to the sign code include adding a new prohibition for devices which use light to project an image onto a surface such as a wall or sidewalk. We've added and clarified that wall signs and projecting visible from and within 100 feet of an adjacent residential zone shall not be externally or internally illuminated. And we've changed the method of measuring brightness from nits to foot candles. So this method has several advantages outlined in the staff report, including the ease of measurement, and it provides a method that is in line with recommendations from the International Sign Association. For temporary signs, we've updated definitions for each type of temporary sign display. We've clarified general development standards, permit applicability, and display time limits, including a 60-day time limit, maximum height allowance, and maximum display surface area for feather flags. Those are the displays that you see there in the center. And setback requirements for wind-driven balloons, which you see over there on the right. And we've also expanded the allowance for sidewalk signs. Currently, the sign code only allows sidewalk signs to be placed in the downtown area. So we've expanded that to include locations outside of downtown for buildings that are placed right up to the property line where they have wider sidewalks. For permanent signs, we've updated the maximum height allowance for roof signs that are placed on flat roofs. We've clarified and updated standards for wall signs on walls abutting a public alley. Staff is not proposing any changes to murals. Currently, there is an exemption for public murals, public art, and street paintings when they're approved under the rules of Chapter 15 by the Salem Arts Commission. Murals that can't meet the requirements of Chapter 15 could be considered signs and would be regulated under the sign code. City staff is not able to make content-based regulations and can't distinguish between works of art and other forms of speech. So the most common issue that applicants run into with murals is their size. You can see from the example here that that painting took up most of the building wall. So yeah, often murals, they occupy the majority of the wall and exceeding their display surface allowances. The proposed code amendment will reconfigure, update, and clarify the development standards applicable to permanent signs. The staff report and draft code amendment identify each of the proposed changes. In general, the goal is to restructure the permanent sign allowance into groups of zones that share similar characteristics and to provide a consistent, organized method of the development standards applicable based on the uses within each section. In general, the amendment results in display area allowances and height allowances that are either kept at a similar level or that were reduced in size. However, greater flexibility is offered for what side of the building wall signs can be placed. The proposal also updates the menu board allowance for businesses with a drive-through service lane. Currently, one board is permitted per lane, and the proposal will allow a maximum of 2 menu boards per lane, but there will be a maximum collective display surface allowance for the menu boards. The amendment also removes references to some old overlay zones. The proposed code amendment clarifies separation requirements between outdoor advertising signs and dwelling units, as well as spacing and density requirements. Staff is also recommending that outdoor advertising signs be a prohibited type of sign in the MU3 zone. The Our Salem project approved in 2022 resulted in updates to zoning and comprehensive plan designations for several properties within the city, and remove some overlay zones where outdoor advertising signs or billboards were prohibited. Within the former South Gateway overlay zone, in particular, a large number of properties were rezoned to MU3 and are currently eligible for this type of sign where previously they were not allowed. This was an unintended outcome of the Our Salem projects. There are several existing outdoor advertising signs in the MU3 zone. If the amendment is adopted, these will become non-conforming signs that may be continue to be used and repaired and maintained for their lifespan. In response to testimony received, the proposed amendment incorporates the Planning Commission recommendation that outdoor advertising signs be allowed to be relocated on the same development site, provided that the new sign otherwise complies with all applicable development standards. Testimony received. So for the Planning Commission hearing back in May, we did receive testimony in opposition to the proposal to remove outdoor advertising signs as a permitted sign type in the MU3 zone. As discussed, if the amendment is adopted, existing outdoor advertising signs in the MU3 zone would become non-conforming signs. The proposed amendment incorporates the recommended language from the Planning Commission, allowing outdoor advertising signs in the MU3 zone to be removed, replaced, and relocated on the same development site, as long as the new outdoor advertising sign otherwise complies with applicable development standards. We received testimony about murals, requesting that the sign code provides some allowance for artists to create murals on walls and fences. And as mentioned, city staff cannot make a distinction between works of art and other types of wall sign displays meant for advertising businesses and services, meaning that the sign code cannot create separate display allowances based on the content of the sign. Public murals that are original works of art are allowed and encouraged in the city through the Public Mural Program, which is administered by the Salem Public Arts Commission. And no changes are proposed to the sign code or the public art chapter regarding murals at this time. Testimony was received regarding proliferation of temporary signs in the public right-of-way, the display period for realtor signs, and requesting an allowance for certain types of signs for community events to be placed in the right-of-way. And in spring 2021, the Planning Division hired a sign inspector, primarily responsible for enforcement of the sign code. Since the position has been filled, the city has provided regular outreach and education on temporary sign allowances for businesses and organizations. The sign inspector regularly removes temporary signs which are illegally placed or otherwise prohibited. And city staff, again, cannot regulate the content of a sign, so the sign code cannot allow temporary signs with certain content to be placed in the right-of-way while prohibiting others. And realtor signs, in this case, they would be the rigid wood frame signs that you see in people's yards. They are allowed to be displayed for a period of up to 1 year. This time limit renews each year, meaning that there's really no effective maximum time period allowance, and staff is not making any changes to that standard. Finally, we received testimony regarding lighting, and questions and concerns were raised regarding illumination standards for electronic display signs, light pollution, and the environmental impacts of which signs, illuminated signs do contribute. Staff is proposing a change to the method for measuring brightness for illuminated signs to a standard that is easily measurable and enforceable. However, the scope of this amendment did not include any further review of the impacts of light pollution. A comprehensive review of the city's exterior lighting and general illumination standards, which apply to all sources of light, could be conducted as part of a future council-initiated code amendment project. And staff is recommending that the City Council adopt the facts and findings in the staff report and advance ordinance bill number 16-23 to first reading for the purpose of amending the sign code. Thank you.
Thank you. I have, so it's time for questions of staff. Could you back up all the way to the art installation at Willamette? I have a question about that slide. I missed this conversation in my pre-council meeting. There, that one. I'm baffled. Did you say that the thing on the left, the art on the left, you're interpreting that as a sign?
You heard correctly, yes.
Did you, so I see that there's an item just next to it. Is that a sign?
That's a sign too. So a sign is...
no, I mean in the same photo, the thing with the bulb on top. Is that a sign?
So a light is defined in the sign code as something that's intended to attract the attention of the public. So pretty broad definition of what a sign could be. So this art installation, visible from the right-of-way, I think meets that intent. I'm not sure about the light pole.
But I could understand it if there was writing on that installation. But in my view of this, there's no way to interpret that as a sign. That's a piece of art on private property. So I'm confused as to why we think that falls under the sign code.
This is one of the challenges with administering the sign code, because this is a piece of art for the university. This could also be a figure, a shape that is a business logo that's placed in the same spot for a business.
But it's not.
We can't really make that determination. If it's intended to attract the attention of the public, we have to regulate it as a sign.
I guess I just have a fundamental disagreement with that concept, but I understand what you're saying. Thank you.
Sure.
Are there additional questions for staff? Councilor Nishioka.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like a little bit more information on the 20% for windows, in the sense that it sounds like they can only have 20% of their window blocked, or is it just 20% of their window can have sign? And part of the reason I'm asking this is it implies that the window needs to be, you'd be able to see in. What about situations where they need privacy, especially with the new apartments going in at the old Nordstrom's building that will have the first floor? And I'm hoping that you're not requiring that those windows have to be visible, like people could see into their apartment.
So you'll see we do have an example of a building that's close up to the street. So the standard would apply within that first 30 feet. And we're proposing that not more than 20% of any of these windows here would be able to be covered by signs. And part of the reason that we're proposing this is, the planning division, we've made several updates to our code, our zones over the last few years to encourage development in our mixed use areas. That's built up to the street. It's engaging for the pedestrian environment. So you have those views provided into shops from pedestrians walking along the sidewalk. So our goal is to keep that interaction between the public right-of-way and the business with this standard. We do have zones like downtown, for example, that currently have a limit on how opaque a window can be. So that standard may already apply, and somebody may not be able to completely block the view of like an apartment building or some other type of business that may need privacy.
So just to be clear, that there's other regulations on privacy issues that would allow that to happen if they needed privacy? Or are they still going to be required? I'm sorry, I'm just trying to.
Maybe I can help. Hi, I'm Lisa Anderson. I will be your planning administrator. So there's rules in most of our mixed use zones, including downtown, that prohibit you from blocking the window so that you can't see in. There's a requirement that you have to be able to see in the window. There's no prohibition on having curtains, for example, but you can't on a ground floor building downtown black out the window, make it a mirrored window or something like that, or put some sort of film on it that you cannot see in. So that's already a standard in most of our mixed use zones. But I don't know if there still is. There used to be a downtown shop and they had curtains because they used it for like massage right there. There's something, or tanning or something, I always thought it was a weird use right there on the street, but they would put up curtains, right, for their privacy. So this is a little different because now we're talking about areas maybe that either have that standard or don't, but we're talking about signage specifically. So it's not necessarily about tinting their windows to not see in, but can they be allowed to use their windows to drastically exceed the signage that we would generally allow on the outside of the building? So they come in, they get a sign permit, and we say, okay, your sign's limited to this size, but because they were built with big windows, then they go and fill the whole inside of their windows with additional signage that right now is exempt.
Thank you.
What if the curtains are pretty? Is it then art? Sorry, it's a rhetorical
maybe
question.
it'll need a permit, maybe.
Other questions? Councillor Hoy.
Thank you. Where did this idea start? Who started this drive for this change, these changes?
Is the specific to the 20%
Or what?
The
No,
entire...
just well, let me ask another question. How long has the public known about this coming their way? Businesses, maybe if nobody's here to testify, it could be that they're not aware that this is going to happen or may happen. So.
Yeah, we've been working on the sign code for several years. So back in 2016, 2017, we had efforts that went to a previous council and were stalled and ultimately abandoned. We've been working on this overhaul of the sign code for several years now. We've had work sessions with the Planning Commission. We had a series of 3 back in 2022 to get feedback from the public, to get feedback from the commissioners, and help kind of shape the amendment that you're seeing tonight before you. We've been working with the billboard companies. We've been working with sign companies, trying to get their feedback on how we can improve the sign code.
Thank you. And I don't doubt your hard work. I believe it, because there's a lot to this report. As a business owner, I know I'm busy, and something like this could come right by me, and all of a sudden it's a thing. My business is in the county, so I don't have to worry about this necessarily right now. But I'm just concerned about a lack of awareness, and that businesses should be given the opportunity to realize, businesses, churches, whatever you want to call it, to understand what might be coming their way with plenty of notification.
Councillor Stapleton.
Thank you. I understand your concerns and the points that you've brought up. This update is really meant to clarify and simplify the code that we have, because right now it's kind of a behemoth and very complicated to work around and work with for a business coming in to try to understand how to use it. These updates are going to help kind of streamline all of those efforts. I know that there were several issues, at least in my ward, especially with the billboard conversation, or is that what they're called, sandwich boards? A lot of businesses wanting to use them but not being able to. So I know that there's also, kind of on the flip side, there's a lot of things that have been taken into account from the business community that you've made achievable within this sign update. And you mentioned briefly that you worked with a lot of different folks in order to make this all kind of coalesce together. So I wanted to thank you for that, and just kind of point out really that I'm hoping that this can pass tonight, because it was stalled recently, or not recently, I guess a few years ago. But really, I think there's a lot of useful things in this that will be beneficial for the whole community. So I'm really hopeful that it passes and that we can move on and get new updates.
Thank you, Councilor. Ms. Anderson-Ogilvie, could you maybe speak for a moment to your approach to enforcement? You and I had a conversation the other day about how the code enforcement person kind of approaches sign issues, and I think that might be helpful for council to have the benefit of the things that I heard from you.
Absolutely. So we do have a sign inspector, Stephanie Myers, who came here tonight to answer questions if I'm not able to. It is a position that we added a few years ago. We raised our sign fees to be able to cover this position because it had been eliminated during the recession and proliferation of illegal signs in the right-of-way and people installing signs without permits was happening. So Stephanie spent quite a few years first on outreach, the chamber and realtors and kind of larger groups, neighborhoods, and then going door to door. So in the beginning, when there was a sign in the right-of-way, if it's a business right there, she would go in and talk to them and give them a flyer, help them figure out where they could put their sign. She still does that if it's the first time she's maybe seen their sign before, or maybe they just didn't know. She does a lot of collection of signs that are placed in the right-of-way. There's a lot of various folks that will come along and put 40, 50 around the city for their business, maybe not understanding or maybe not caring about the regulations. I think on any day when Stephanie goes out with the truck, she can fill the back of the truck in one business day with picking up illegal signs. We do keep those signs for 30 days. People can retrieve them if they pay a fee of $55 per sign. Most folks don't retrieve their signs because they were cheaper to make than it's worth to pay that fee. Does that cover generally what you were thinking? I mean, Stephanie does a lot of outreach, and she also handles sign complaints. So if we get complaints about, somebody in a certain area or certain signs, sometimes she'll switch her schedule and work on weekends to deal with those complaints. She also reviews our sign permits and issues the permits and does all the inspections for signs that are installed. And if an actual compliance case needs to be opened for an illegal sign, she's a compliance officer, so she does that work as well.
Thank you. Yes, that was kind of what I was getting at. I think I just wanted people to be aware that it's not strictly a citation kind of situation. There's a lot of education, and when she works with business owners to try to help educate them before we have to go to that sort of next step. So I just wanted people to be aware of that. So thank you. Councilor Phillips. Oh, Councilor Gwynn. Nope, well, he said you.
So I have a couple questions. I spent a good portion of my afternoon driving around today looking at the window signs that you're talking about. You laugh. I have pictures, and I can put them on the screen if you want to see them. So I guess my concern with the 20% rule is, when does it go into effect? What happens to existing ones? I guess we can start there.
So if we adopt the sign code with this change, it would apply to any signs that are installed going forward. If there is a business that has a window that's completely covered with signs, they would be non-conforming. They would have been installed at a time that the sign code permitted it, so they'd have non-conforming rights to keep that covering.
For how long?
until the status of that is terminated. It could be terminated by taking out the display, putting something up. It could be terminated if a business changes and another business takes it down and puts up something else. Or, this council could also direct us to put something specifically in the code that says this standard applies to all signs within a set period of time.
And my concern is, like the tree ordinance, we had people that, clearly that did not know, even though there were plenty of public comments and where people should have known, they didn't know. And that's my concern here with that. I noticed one of the things was flags and the size of flags. We have two very prominent ones. I know of the two, one on Mission Street, one on Market Street, that are clearly way larger than what your maximum is for the size of a flag. So what happens with those?
It'd be the same response. So if we change the code and implement the new standard, those existing flags that exceed height or display area could continue to remain for their lifespan.
So if the flag is damaged and has to be replaced, they can replace that sign or that flag, or now that flag is too large?
There would be provisions for repair and maintenance of the flag. So,
of the existing
yep.
flag. The flutter flags or those banners, I thought I saw something where a property owner can only have one. Is that?
So currently there's no limit
Right.
and there's no size limit. We're proposing a few things: height maximum of 13 feet, a display area maximum of 50 square feet, and then a permit would be valid for a period of 60 days, and a property owner can have 2 of those per year.
So like there's some businesses that, I have pictures of those too, that have like 5 or 6. So now all of a sudden they're not going to be able to have their banner flags. I have some real concerns personally, and I'm not going to be able to support the amendments as written. The other thing, temporary signs, and you and I talked about this in your office, is, what about holiday? My family celebrates certain holidays, and I've got a big pumpkin, not in my yard right now, but a neighbor does, and that's not in compliance with the sign code. So, right?
The
like
sign
a big
code,
Christmas
yeah.
tree, a big Santa Claus, a big pumpkin, a big ghost. They're within 35 feet.
It is silent on holiday decorations, and I don't believe the city's ever enforced holiday decorations as a sign.
But if we have a Scrooge that doesn't want someone to have like a holiday decoration, they could be complaining, and then is Stephanie going to be over there saying, I'm sorry, but you have a nasty neighbor and your decoration doesn't meet our temporary sign code?
Yeah, I think we're just left with the reality that a definition of a sign is really, really broad. And so we couldn't put a provision to say you can have holiday decorations in the residential zone, because then we would have to look at your decoration to understand if it's holiday. That would be kind of reading it. We could say certain months. We're not going to enforce it, but it would be of all signage on all residential property. So if we decide that October, November, December is the month that people put up holiday decorations, then we would be saying you can have any sort of signage on your residential property. That's also, election season, et cetera, they kind of overlap. Or what about somebody that wants really big, Easter decorations? We didn't pick April. So we're kind of left with being silent on it. And again, like Aaron says, to our knowledge, we've never received a complaint and we've not enforced it. We do receive complaints about people putting signage on their house, banners and things like that. And we go out and Generally, the complaint is about the content, but we can only go out and enforce on the size or the type of signage that they've put. But it's never been holiday decorations.
I guess for me, some of this is just too vague, and I wouldn't be able to support it.
Let's go to Phillips, and then I'll go over to Hoy.
Boom. Thank you. So I guess I would like to paraphrase on this most recent topic. Like what I'm hearing, the question on like specifically with holiday signs is that we shouldn't and haven't put it in here because it gets too technocratic and staff can't determine things based on content. You can't look at it. But what I'm hearing you say in these new rules is we have to have this unwritten rule that we're not going to do anything about holiday decorations. Like that's the standard is like we don't do anything about that and we're not planning to do anything about that.
I guess I would say we're not changing anything that would change how we've dealt with it in the past, which has been we haven't dealt with it because we don't receive those complaints.
So our usual and customary practices, that's okay. Holiday stuff's fine.
We've not received any complaints, so we've not had to.
And we can't even answer the question because it's so nebulous. All right, okay, that's difficult. So back to like Mayor Hoy's question, or at least I think this overlaps a little bit. A year and a half ago, 2 years ago, there was like a mural that came up in Southeast Salem in Ward 3, and it got flagged as potentially being like not in compliance with our sign amendments, and then I think it became determined that it was art or something. How would that work moving forward? Like how does this work where you guys, that technically to start with is a sign, but then it's later determined to be art?
So it's always a sign unless it's approved through the Art Commission as a mural. So something like this. So we do have provisions. If the Art Commission approves something as a mural, it's exempt from the sign code. So they didn't start that process when they painted this. So in fact, poor Stephanie, because she got a lot of harassment, did have to go out and enforce on this. And the options after talking to the owners was to comply with the sign code, which means basically paint over almost all of it because it was too big, or go apply to the Art Commission and go through that process. So we put a hold on the enforcement while they went through that process, and they were able to get it approved, and therefore it was exempt from the sign code.
So basically, just to kind of rehash this, people need to know that they should apply to the Art Commission for large murals.
Yes, and they generally don't. Usually they have a conversation with Stephanie, and then she says, well, now that's there, you should go this route and see if you can get that approved.
Okay.
I think the one on the left maybe was the same route. Yeah, it was installed, and we went out and sent them that way.
I think a successful resolution was found, but thank you for reminding me and the community on how that would work. The final thing is 20% the right answer on windows? Like, I don't mean to be that guy to bring it up, but is 20% easier than 25% or 50%? I mean, it's like 1/5 of the surface area. Is it surface area or height? Like, what is the 20%?
It's the surface area of the window.
Okay. Yep. And why? Like, why do we use? Is that the norm? Is that the industry standard?
I believe this came out of the Planning Commission work session. So we presented the problem. We've created these new zones which encourage these buildings to be placed up to the street and have open windows to the public. So this conflicts with that, having window area that can be covered completely. So through the discussion with the Planning Commission, this is how we landed on the 30-foot back, the 20% window.
Okay. And is this just in that new like mixed use or zone, or is this citywide?
Anywhere, citywide. Okay. If you have a building within 30 feet of the street, it would apply on those windows.
Yeah, if somebody has temporary signs up for like less than 60 days around political events, is that still within that 20%, or is that unique to the 60-day rule for like elections?
So the 60-day thing, you may be thinking of lawn signs.
Yeah.
So lawn signs, they don't require a permit. They can be placed on private property. I
guess my question is sometimes people put those in their windows.
Right.
So is it still just the 20% is the maximum?
If it's inside the window, it wouldn't be a lawn sign, so it wouldn't be subject to the same time limits. So as long as they're within the percentage allowance for the window.
Okay.
Yep.
And 20% is what the Planning Commission process determined was better.
Correct.
I probably would call it 25.
Yeah, you were next.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm just curious. How many billboards, like if they ran their lifespan, would have to be decommissioned or taken down?
That's a good question. I don't think we have the number exactly. We do have a map that shows kind of the areas that we're talking about. So, and apologize for the difficulty to see here. The map on the left shows all the potential locations that you could find a billboard. Now there's some caveats. When we created this map, we couldn't buffer from all the known residential locations, which could further restrict where billboards are. We also don't have a complete inventory of every billboard. So there's spacing and density standards that apply along streets for how many billboards there could be. But what you see over here on this map is the locations where a billboard could potentially be. If it's not highlighted, a billboard would not be permitted there. So what staff is proposing is removing the MU3 zoning from that map. So the map on the right shows what this looks like without the MU3 zones. So the compromise with the Planning Commission is that if you have a billboard that's in the MU3 zone and it ends its lifespan, the billboard could be replaced in a different location on the same property as long as it complies with all applicable development standards.
Thank you. And one last thing. The realtor signs you mentioned, was that the wooden signs?
Yes, the one I mentioned, or the one that we received testimony on, those were specific to the ones that are on the wood frames in folks' yards. There was a concern that there wasn't enough time allowance for the display. The current code allows the 1 year for these types of displays that renews every year, and we're not proposing any changes to that.
Okay, and does that apply to aluminum signs as well?
Aluminum?
Yeah, like if they were to be made of something else, or is it just the...
If it falls under the construction requirements for rigid signs, which aluminum, you're talking about like the face, it would work, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Gwynn?
So I spent less than 2 hours this afternoon driving around, and I didn't go to every street. I drove down Lancaster, and I understand a good portion of Lancaster is outside of the city limits. I drove down Silverton Road, I drove out Commercial Street, Liberty, and I took over 60 photos of signs. And we're not, the businesses that would be affected by this are not Fred Meyer or Safeway or any, most of these are local business owners, they're families. And so for us to limit, and I mean, I could live with a limit to the size, but 20%, I think is it's too restrictive, and it's going to affect families. So it concerns me deeply.
Further questions for staff? Councilor Nishioka.
Thank you. This question is probably going to be directed to our city attorney. I'm curious about, and I'm going to specifically talk about the sandwich boards. Oftentimes those are put out and taken away, put out, and they're supposed to be placed in certain areas, but they might not put it where they're supposed to. I'm curious as to who's responsible if somebody tripped over one of these signs. Is it the business that's responsible for potential injury, or is it the city because the city gave the permit? I'm just trying to understand, and whether that it's in the right place or the wrong place, is there any change in liability issues?
Dan Atchison, City Attorney. Essentially, it's the owner of the sign. If they're placing it in an area where, it's going to cause a tripping hazard or something like that. I mean, there's all sorts of, theories on liability if our standard isn't correct and it met the standard and the person tripped anyway. If there's other aspects of the design of the sidewalk and things like that, creative personal injury attorneys can always find a way to articulate a theory of liability. So. But essentially, it's the owner of the sign who placed it incorrectly would be the primary culprit.
Thank you.
Further questions? Councilor Varney.
Thank you. I was wondering if a decision is made on a sign and someone disagrees with it, what is the appeal process? Is there one?
Your microphone's not on, Mr. Banco.
Thank you. There's no local appeal process, I believe, for a sign permit. We do have, the processes for adjustments and variances that we're proposing to eliminate. We do have within the code already some adjustment and variances process that can be used to apply towards signs. Those do get public notice. There's a amount of discretion that's involved on staff part on whether or not to grant the adjustment. And there is an appeal process, local appeal process for those decisions that the planning administrator makes.
Okay, how do people find out about that? The appeal process, et cetera?
So if we were to receive an adjustment application, notice would go out to property owners surrounding the property that's requesting the adjustment. So they would be invited to comment on the case. If they do, they'll receive notice of the decision, and we have appeal instructions provided in our decisions.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
And notice goes to the neighborhood association.
Thanks.
Councilor Nordyke.
Thank you. So I'm curious how many small businesses would be impacted by this ordinance? Can you estimate?
If they operate in Salem, I would say every one of them, if they want a sign, could potentially be impacted by the changes that we're making.
Right. And I think my point goes to the fact that small business owners have certain fixed costs. You open a business, one of the first thing you do, you buy a sign. That's supposed to be hopefully your forever sign, your forever location. Maybe you've been working out of a food cart or a basement or a garage, and you finally built your brick and mortar facility. And one of the first things you do after you sign your lease is you put up your sign, and you hope that this might be, again, your forever home for your business. So a lot of businesses hope this will be a one-time cost. I put up my sign, it's Simon & Sons or whatever it might be. I don't plan on changing the name of my business or the look of my sign or my brand forever. This is my brand. These are my colors. This is the font I've used. There's graphic design that often goes into that. It's not cheap, in other words, to create a permanent sign, much less a temporary sign. So I am concerned at how many could be impacted, and I'm trying to unpack some of the bureaucratic language in the staff report. It says, quote, non-conforming signs may continue to be used until the non-conforming status of the sign is terminated. What does that mean?
So for our example with billboards, if we were to make changes to the sign code where an existing billboard that received permits, complied with all requirements, if we change the code on them and they're no longer permitted, they would become a non-conforming sign. Non-conforming signs can be repaired, they can be maintained, they can be structurally altered for safety of the sign, but they can't be relocated on the property in that same location if there's an issue like with setbacks, or they can't be rebuilt if they exceed height standards to that same height. It's the rebuilding of the sign that would bring them into compliance.
Okay, so again, I'm using my fictional business of Simon & Sons. There's a sign, there's a billboard that they put up, and it's no longer in conformance for various reasons. Under those circumstances, does the city send them a notice and apprise them that they have to change the sign or face a fine? Is that how that works? I'm really confused by that.
We don't, and yeah, we don't do that.
So what would happen?
It's not retroactive. So anybody that has a sign, if the standard changes, like if this is adopted, they can have their sign forever.
Okay.
It's only if they want to come in and get a new sign. Maybe they say, maybe it's a new business and the sign's up there and they're like, oh, well, that's not my logo. I want that same 30-foot size sign. And we're like, oh, well, now you can only have 24. So then the new business will be impacted. Or recently Walmart said they did some rebranding and they wanted to remove their sign and replace it. And it didn't fit the size, right? So they had to, because the code had changed on them. Since they got the last 30 years ago, they put that signage up. But otherwise, we're not going out and telling people they have to change it. They can keep the sign forever, and like Aaron said, they can maintain it. They can change out the face of the sign, pop it off and put a new business name and keep the sign. That's pretty common. If there's something wrong with it structurally and they need another support beam or something, they can do that. It's just really they can't, once they take the sign completely down, that's what we mean by terminating the nonconformity. They lose all those rights. They don't get to come a month later and put one back up that doesn't meet the code.
Thank you. That is very helpful.
Yeah.
So, for example, just another analogy. There are from time to time there might be an accounting firm or a law firm where they might change a single name. There's several firms in town. I'm not going to call out any specific label. Let's just randomly say Johnson & Johnson. Let's say one of the partners leaves and now it's a Johnson & Simon. Is that the sort of thing that they could change? If they change nothing else to the sign, but all they do is tweak the name to reflect the fact that some boomers are retiring, some new people are coming into the firm, is that the sort of thing that someone would be allowed to do and not have to construct a whole new sign altogether?
Generally, yeah, it depends on how the sign was built, but for example, that could just be like they pop off the face and the sign company puts a new one back on. And that's really common, and I think even maybe exempt from permits. It's exempt from permits. So we see that all the time. People call and we say, oh, you don't even need a permit for that.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. That's very helpful.
Other questions? Councilor Varney.
Thank you. This is probably a little more technical, but I was just curious about the electronic display signs and the changing the method for measuring brightness. How do you measure the brightness? I mean, maybe I should go to whatever the manual you were referring to, but I was kind of curious as to how that's done.
We had a field trip a few months ago, and we took some folks out to do this too. But we do have a light meter that measures illumination in foot candles. And the proposed code, it gives us some guidance about how large the sign is, how far you have to be back, and how you take your measurements. So you have to take an ambient light measurement. So you try our best to kind of block out the light from the sign and get a reading. And then you get a reading with the sign on. So this is the method, again, that's provided from the International Sign Association.
And Mr. Panko, if I'm not mistaken, currently we really can't do that sort of enforcement because of the standard that's in our code. This will actually allow us to enforce the code. Is that correct?
This is going to be much easier for staff to measure and enforce, correct? The current code uses nits, which is a measure of brightness or light intensity from the screen. We don't have a device that does that, and the measurements aren't easy to take. So this is a better method, I think.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Phillips.
So, help me understand the process. If we get through our questions, and this is a question, and we move to voting on this, if we vote on this, it'll go to a first reading. Would it be too late at that point? If I go home and decide, I really want the windows to be 50%, not 20%, is it too late to switch it at that point? At the time of the first or second reading? Do I need to make those amendments now, or?
You probably haven't noticed, but we did this a little bit differently. We're holding the public hearing first, and we haven't done first reading yet. So,
okay.
Before we take this to first reading, if council, I should say, has some recommended changes to the ordinance, we can do that administratively and bring it forward to you at first reading with those changes. If after first reading you decide you want different or more changes, you can always make that motion, and we can engross the ordinance after that.
Okay. And when would first reading be? It's not later tonight, is it?
No.
Okay. So I don't have to determine if I want 25% or 50% right now.
Councilor, you don't, but we're probably not going to make a change if a single councilor emails us and says, hey, I really want X change, because it's more of a council direction, not a councilor direction.
Thank you for that.
And just to kind of further that point, we also don't have to make a decision tonight. If a majority of folks aren't ready to make a decision, we could delay this. There's no pressing time matter that requires us to do this tonight. So That's another option as well, if you want more time to think
I'm
about
open
whether,
to tabling it, but
so you can figure out whether 20% or 50% is better. Yes, I know you're going to give that deep thought. I will do that. Do we have any other questions from council at this time? Councilor Gwynn.
I know, I'm sorry. I still wasn't clear if what the sanctions are, I guess, is the best thing that I can think of to say. And for those banners, I'm thinking on Market Street. I drove by a car dealership today, and they had like balloons and a bunch of those banners. So if this moves forward and their banners are still out there, what happens to them? What happens to folks who are not complying?
If we receive a complaint, our code enforcement officer will respond to them, go out to the business and check on compliance for the banners. So it could be a problem in the current code for their temporary sign allowance. We are making some changes, so they may not be able to have as many pennants, or they may not be able to have like the wind-driven balloon as close to the street as it is currently. But the standards are generally there, and they should be getting permits for these types of displays.
So those require a permit now?
Yes, banners, pennants, so the feather flags, and balloons, those are all temporary permits that require, or temporary signs that require permits under the current code.
And if people continue to not comply, what are the fines? What is the fine schedule? I guess that's kind of what I'm looking for. Because I thought I read somewhere up to $2,000.
It can start anywhere
Could you
from...
introduce yourself, please, for the record? Thank you.
I'm Stephanie Myers, the Planning Code Compliance Officer. The fines start anywhere from $250 a day per violation, and they go up to $2,000 per day per violation, depending on what the violation is.
How many of those violations with the financial penalty have you issued in the last year?
I couldn't give you a number, but...
Ballpark.
Oh, gosh.
1, 100?
No, like a dozen.
Okay.
Yeah. But that's after a lot of outreach. There's verbal warnings, there's a correction notice, there's an enforcement order, and there's a civil penalty, and there's 100 extensions in between each and every one of those.
So that's kind of a last resort situation
Absolutely.
when you're actually...
Yep, our goal is voluntary compliance. Yep.
Other questions? Councillor Stapleton.
Thank you. This is kind of bothering me on the pictures on the screen. The blue flutter flags, those are illegally placed, correct?
That's right. So this appears to be in the public right-of-way. So you can see the sidewalk is a good indication of where the property line would be on this side. And this is a planter strip that's most likely public property, where currently you can't have temporary signs, and we're not proposing any changes to that. So it's in a wrong spot.
Okay, thanks.
Any additional questions for staff? Councillor Varney.
I'm sorry. Thank you. Thinking about right-of-way, so how are people going to know where the right-of-way is? I guess I'm thinking of if there is a sidewalk, but then there is a utility pole on the private side of the sidewalk, how do you determine where the right-of-way is in that instance?
There's not a great method. So a lot of times we see curb line sidewalks. And there may be a few feet or maybe several feet back from where the public right-of-way ends and where the property begins. So in some cases, it is difficult for us to determine where that property line is. These cases here that you see in the screen, it's pretty straightforward, but you're correct. I mean, it could be difficult in other cases.
Any additional questions for staff? Oh, we do have one more. Councilor
It's not
Varney.
a question, just a comment.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in favor of more time for this. I know you guys have worked your tails off on all this information, but this is really new to me. The specifications, and I haven't heard anybody in my sphere talking about it. So that's just what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other questions for staff before we move to deliberations? I would like to open it up for if there's any members of the public who wanted to comment who didn't have the opportunity to sign up. Is there anybody here who wanted to comment to council? Seeing nobody, we will close the public hearing. Oop.
If I can provide a parliamentary piece of advice. So you have two options tonight. You can close the public hearing and continue it to a future meeting for deliberations, or you can keep the hearing open if you think members of the public might want to come back at a future date to provide testimony. They can always submit written testimony.
What's your pleasure?
I think we need to keep it open.
Okay. We're not ready to make a decision tonight, it sounds like. Is that what I'm hearing? I'm seeing several head nods.
Yeah, and I also think that there are members here, and myself included, that I think want the opportunity for people to come down and provide public comment. So I really do feel like it should be left open.
Thank you. I would encourage staff or counselors also, if you have questions or want to have more in-depth conversation, definitely reach out to the staff. They offered meetings to us all. I had a chat with Mr. Panko and Ms. Anderson-Ogilvie the other day. It was really helpful to kind of wrap my head around this and then get it again during the presentation. There's a lot. So I encourage you to do that as well. So it sounds like we do not need a motion then?
I think the motion would be to continue the hearing to the November 9th council meeting. Is that the next meeting?
How about if we just say the first meeting in November?
Sure. I move that we continue this hearing at the next meeting, which is, I believe, first meeting in November.
Second.
Motion by Stapleton, second by Phillips. Discussion? Councilor Phillips, if this has to do with 20 or 50%, no.
I mean, indirectly, or no, I really just wanted to say that my intent is, I think one of the worser outcomes of this situation is not to support, the overall effort. So I hope that we can find something, because I think a lot of good work went into this. I just want to understand the specifics and give the community a little more time. So I think this is the right way to go. And I really appreciate the work staff has done.
Thank you, Councilor. Any further discussion? Councilor Quinn.
I just wanted to say I realize this is years in the making, and I do think that we'll be able to come to a compromise that everyone can live with. I just think we need more public input.
Thank you, Councilor. Further discussion? Will the recorder please call the roll?
Councilor Gwynn.
Aye.
Councilor Gonzalez.
Aye.
Councilor Hoy.
Aye.
Councilor Nordyke. Aye. Councilor Varney.
Aye.
Councilor Stapleton.
Aye.
Councilor Nishioka.
Aye.
Councilor Phillips.
Aye.
Mayor Hoy.
Aye. Motion passes. All right, we are on to
Mayor
special.
Hoy, could I ask for a recess? Could we do a 5-minute recess, or is it now
Certainly.
not okay?
We can do a 5-minute recess. We're on recess for 5 minutes.
Thanks.
All right, we are back together again. Where did we leave off? We voted on that last motion, so.
Yeah, we're at 5, so I think Councillor Gwynn's motion.
No, we're
No.
at 5A. So we are at item 5A, which is an update on the city's sidewalk repair program. Mr. Martin, is that you? I see your green light on.
We're going to have Brandon Klukas take item 5A, but I wanted to tee it up first.
Great.
We have
Come on down, Brandon.
two items tonight. We're going to give presentations on 5A, which is the update on the sidewalk program, and item 5B, which is the process for selecting projects as part of the 2022 Safety and Livability Bond Program. And the City Council Steering Committee for the bond program has been looking at criteria for sidewalks and pedestrian crossings for probably 3 or 4 months and has come to some conclusions on a process to proceed with. But before we talked about that, we thought it'd be good to talk about our overall sidewalk program that we have ongoing on an annual basis. That program is funded with gas tax funds, and it will continue to be ongoing, even though the bond projects will also provide funding for additional repairs. So Brandon's going to talk about our existing program, which happens on an annual basis, and when he's done, we go to item 5B. Julie Hansen will discuss the proposed plan for spending funding with the bond program.
All right.
All right, Brandon.
Brandon, be sure to hit that. There you go.
Brandon Klukas, Street Maintenance Operations Group Manager with the City of Salem.
Yes, stop touching.
What's that? Nobody wants that.
There it is.
It's time to start humming again, Mr. Atchison.
There you go. Is that better?
All right.
Okay. Brandon Klukas, Street Maintenance Operations Group Manager for the City of Salem. Here to talk about sidewalks, give you a real high-level look at the sidewalk programs for the city. We're going to talk about the Salem Revised Code, Chapter 78, staffing history, program history, the pedestrian network, and program goals. Salem Revised Code was amended in 2007. Prior to that, city had maintained responsibility for the maintenance of sidewalks throughout the community. In 2007, there was a change to that allowed for transition maintenance responsibility. So any sidewalks constructed after September 1st, 1992 became the responsibility of the adjacent property owner for future maintenance. Sidewalks during the condition assessment that were found to be in acceptable condition also transitioned to maintenance responsibility for the adjacent property owner. Any sidewalks that since that point have been brought up to standard are also the responsibility of the adjacent property owner. The damages caused by city trees continue to be the maintenance responsibility of the city. We have a GIS layer that tracks the different maintenance responsibilities for the city, keeps track of the status of individual tax lots. The areas in dark purple that you see there are areas that have been rehabilitated since the original condition assessment. The areas in blue are areas that the city still maintains responsibility for the maintenance responsibility of the sidewalks. Areas in green are areas that were either found to be in acceptable condition during the condition assessment or the sidewalks themselves were constructed after September 1st, 1992. This is a living layer. We maintain it as new information becomes available. Roughly 54% of the total network by tax law is still the responsibility of the City of Salem for maintenance at this time in 2023. The sidewalk rehab team was formed in 2008. Prior to that year, in 2007, the maintenance budget for the City of Salem was fairly minimal, about $44,000 per fiscal year, translated to about 1,670 square feet of sidewalk and 1 ADA ramp during that fiscal year. Over time, more staff were added. 2015, we saw additions to the concrete section to the sidewalk rehab team. In 2016, a concrete supervisor was added for the program. 17, the response team was added. In 2020, the patch and grind team. Until in 22-23, our annual budget was $2.1 million for sidewalk rehabilitation throughout the community. We were able to.
Brandon, could you stay over closer to the microphone, please?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
It was about $2.1 million in fiscal year 22-23. We were able to achieve about 46,000 square feet of sidewalk and 80 ADA ramps during that year. The sidewalk rehab team was formed in 2008. The program initially followed concentric circles around the downtown core. Was later tasked to complete the priority list sent by Disability Rights Oregon for areas of public accommodation around the community where the city had not, in their estimation, provided accessibility for people facing mobility challenges. After that was completed, they returned to the concentric circle maintenance and were later tasked with repairs in the Court Chemeketa Historic District as well as the Gady Hill Historic District. Currently, the program is primarily focused on critical ADA routes throughout the community as defined by the Transportation System Plan. The sidewalk response team that was formed in 2017, its main focus is sidewalk repairs throughout the different neighborhood associations within the city. It's a customer request-based repair team, which means that it only takes a look at requests that have come in from the community within that neighborhood association and prioritizes them based on the hazards found at that location and the public use of that tax lot. There currently takes about 2 to 3 years to complete a full cycle of the city through the varying neighborhood associations. We do an internal rotation through the neighborhood associations closer to the core, and then an outward rotation through the neighborhood associations on the outside of the community. We're currently working in NOLA, and upcoming we'll be moving through NESCA, Elna, Semca, Morningside in that order. Probably take about 6 to 9 months to get through those neighborhood associations. I don't know why whoops. Supposed to be a graphic here to show you. The sidewalk network itself is comprised of about 815 linear miles of sidewalk. If you took all those panels and stretched them out end to end, you could start in Salem, Oregon and walk to Bakersfield, California. Of that area, 54%, which is designated by the blue line there, is still the responsibility of the City of Salem for maintenance. The other 44% has been turned over to adjacent property owners. 2% is held by agencies or local government, state, and county. What that translates to for us is if we take our annual replacement amounts of about 1.75 miles versus the amount of sidewalk network that's left needing rehabilitation, that's our responsibility, we're on a 250-year replacement cycle with our current investment. The average asset depreciation rate, we should expect a 50 to 25-year life cycle out of those sidewalks, out of that asset. You can get more if they're based on environmental factors. You could have less, just depending on what the situation is at that specific location. Trees are a big impact to the longevity or health or length of time you could expect to get out of that asset. Conversely, if the Salem Revised Code had not been amended, we would still maintain 100% of the network, which means the whole full 815 miles. which means at our current rate, we would have a 465-year replacement cycle to be able to manage the infrastructure. The asset depreciation rate, regardless of how much we take in, doesn't change, right? We would still expect that 50 to 25 year. It means that if we were to meet those goals, we need to be investing in replacement of around 16 to 32 miles of sidewalk a year in order to meet those life cycle goals. Some of our program goals currently, internally, would be to have the ability to rapidly respond to requests for service. I don't know if it was super clear, but prior to 2008, we had no ability to respond. What that created was a backlog that continued to feed in the system, right? So when those programs started in 2008, they didn't start on solid ground or solid footing, right? They started with a backlog, and then it just increased going forward because the life cycle and the depreciation of the asset was greater than the resources we were able to apply to it. Another goal for us is pedestrian network connectivity. We want to look at areas throughout the community and try to open them up for modal transportation methods for all people within the community. There are some people that can't rely on traditional transportation, and those individuals need that connectivity to allow them to gain access from Lancaster to the downtown to West Salem using alternative methods of transportation. We'd also have a goal of having a replacement rate reflective of the life cycle rate. We just are not even close to what the asset needs for its depreciation. So I've also included some examples. 15th Street Northeast. This is an example of a sidewalk repair that's pretty typical for us. It's tree roots, lifting the sidewalk panels. There's nothing functionally wrong with the panels themselves. It's just displacement from the adjacent trees. It's a very common thing, especially in older neighborhoods with mature canopies. This area specifically is across from Barrack Field. There is no sidewalk on the other side, so it was important to us to open up, again, that connectivity, the ability for people to move. Another focus of our programs are ADA ramp replacements. This is an area around Willamette Town Center. There was ADA accessibility concerns to gain access to Willamette Town Center. There was also concerns at the bus stop for people being unloaded, the transportation there. There was spalling joints, spalling panels. It was inhibiting the ability for people in wheelchairs to access the location. Also included an example of some patching and grinding. We utilize grinding a lot as temporary mitigation methods for the offset of panels that happens because of tree lifting. We'll take a machine and mechanically grind off until we remove that vertical offset to reduce the tripping hazard. Patching is something we'll utilize secondary to grinding in locations where grinding isn't an option. Maybe the sidewalk panel has lifted to a point, there's actually nothing left underneath the grind. If you start to grind, it's just gone. Or for areas, as in this example, where the machinery used for it can't do two counter grinds because of the spatial limitations, because of the tree and fence, etc. With that, I'd open it up.
Thank you, Brandon. I noticed that you're talking a lot about repair of existing sidewalks, but I know in my neighborhood, in Councilor Nordike's neighborhood and other places, there are areas that don't have sidewalks that really they're called for. And I'm wondering what kind of impact, if we were actually able to place those, build those sidewalks, like how would that change these numbers?
It would add to the network, right? It adds to the network, but it doesn't add any revenue on the backside for the maintenance of it. Right?
Do we have any idea how many miles of needed sidewalks there are?
I don't off the top of my head, but I could return with those. It's a lot, yeah. And the reality too is a lot of those infrastructure, the addition of that is not a maintenance focus, simply because the supporting infrastructure isn't in place, and so then it really overburdens the maintenance programs and their intent. It is something we do look at. There's areas where if we're having replacement adjacent to something, we can sometimes do infill. Sometimes we can look at solutions where we're having work adjacent to an area in need. We'll try to look at those things, but yeah.
I just also just have one more comment. I know I've said this to you before, but I live in a 20-year-old neighborhood. It was a brand new subdivision built 20 years ago, and unfortunately, the city allowed really inappropriate trees to be planted for street trees. And now all of the sidewalks in my 20-year-old neighborhood are all lifted because we have surface level roots that are this big that are just lifting sidewalks all over the place. And that's super frustrating. So I hope that with our tree program now that we're in a position that we're not creating more problems and we're actually able to actually solve problems and not create them.
Yeah, I think it's something that's constantly evolving. We're constantly reviewing what we've done and then trying to apply that to the future.
Right.
Absolutely.
Questions for Brandon? Councilor Gwynn.
I actually don't have a question. I had a comment, though. So in my day job, we have had issues with sidewalks before, and I wanted to say thank you. Long before I became a counselor, I called you and said, I have a trip hazard. We're trying to close on this property, and the buyer will not close until this is resolved. So you sent out an inspector, which you didn't have to do, and you weren't able to use city dollars at that point to fix it, but you or your team showed us how we could fix it. So I just want to say thank you.
Well, thank you.
Councilor Stapleton.
Thank you. As you know, I am a little bit of an activist when it comes to sidewalks, and I had a number of questions. So you were talking about this program of repairing sidewalks starting in 2008. Since 2008, has the money that we've allocated to the program been equally shared across the whole city?
No.
Okay,
No.
do you know kind of how that has shook out?
So on the initial inception of the program, it followed a concentric circle. So it started on the north side of downtown. I want to, off the top of my head, I don't remember.
Grant, maybe?
Yeah,
Yep.
Grant, and then moving around through Nen and down through the southern portion into Gady Hill, right? So it wasn't equally applied. It was applied with an idea that we would move from the inward outward. I think, and I hesitate to speculate on other people's thoughts on it, but I think that there was perhaps a lack of understanding of the issues, so that at the time we thought the timeline would probably move quicker than it actually did. We then faced outward pressure to start developing programs that sought out needs elsewhere in the community.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, I hear a lot about the Gady Hill improvements.
So do I.
Yes. They're beautiful. Beautiful sidewalks.
You look at me.
It's your award. So I have some questions about, when you go through the packet, you'll see that Ward 1 has an exorbitant amount of need, 619, I think I want to say. And the next one down is about half that. So my question is, how did you come to learn of these complaints? Was it by the GIS assessment that was done, or is it just by complaints?
So those that you're seeing in there are only customer requests. Now, I would say that different members of the community advocate differently for their areas, and so that other people are very familiar with how the city works, they're familiar with the organization, they're familiar with how to process requests. There are other members in the community who are not as vocal, but that system that you're viewing there is primarily customer request. Yes.
So you wouldn't say that this is a good representation, actually, of what the need is in the city?
So I would say that there is nothing in that area where it's called out for on requests that isn't a problem. So the problems are there. I think that if you took that same advocacy to Highland or Grant, you would have the same results. If you took that same advocacy to the West Salem Neighborhood Association and applied it down into the area bordered by Rosemont, Wallace, Edgewater, and Glen Creek, that area, you would have the same results. I think that some of those issues are particular to different locations within the community, but I don't think that there's any part of the community that doesn't have those issues.
Correct. Yeah, and I think that that's represented. I mean, there's issues across the city, and that report shows that. It's kind of funny because all of the areas you just said are all in Ward 1, so I thought that was funny.
Because you have sidewalks to complain about. In my
So-
area, we don't have sidewalks to complain about, so there's not all the
There are
complaints.
parts in my neighborhood that do not have sidewalks, sir. Okay, so about, I guess, I was talking to Councilor Nishioka about this. I understand that, the highest need, according to the report, are Ward 7, Wards 2 and 1, and those are really constitute the older part of the community. And my question is it because of the technology that was used to build the sidewalk? Like, for instance, I know now when you go to build a sidewalk, it's probably much thicker, or there's maybe more underneath it that stabilizes. I mean, is that kind of leading into this issue as well?
So I would say partially, but I mean, I would also qualify it with the, in the 70s, there was an era where the cement mixture that they used was not of the right quality. And so you'll find areas in East Salem, like around Royalty area, Ptarmigan and West Salem, these areas that were built around that range of time, where you see a surface release of the concrete, right? So it's kind of an exception to that rule. You get that spalling, where the top of it just unravels. It looks like a gravel sidewalk. You'll see that in South Salem, Dogwood, Camellia area. You'll see that. So there is that, yes, in older areas you do have issues, sometimes more often than not it's because of trees and mature canopies. You'll notice in areas where you have curb-tight sidewalk and no park strip trees, you're gonna have a lot more longevity out of the asset because you don't have that environmental factor causing impacts. So there's areas in town that are 100 years old that are perfectly fine sidewalks to walk on, just because they have enough distance or they don't have a utility or some other issues causing the failure of the sidewalk itself, the asset.
Do you mind if I keep going? Is it okay?
Go ahead.
Okay. So when we look at how we approach the issue, when you go into an area or when you look at the whole area as one piece, why is it that we don't tackle the most severe cases first? Or do we? I guess that's my question. When you walk into an area, do you look at those bright, deep red colors on the map and say, those are the ones we're going to do first?
So it's somewhat balanced. So I think that's a great question is when we're applying to the different neighborhood associations, that methodology for the response team, we're going to look at a couple of factors. The first one is going to be that priority list we've established, right? But that priority list has components to it that are not quite equity-based as we're used to in this chamber of calling equity, but it's things that we call out to rate it into a higher priority. One of them is mobility challenges. If the person making the request suffers from mobility challenges or this is creating a barrier for them to access service, that jumps it higher. It's basically a reverse factor. It has a so our public use prioritization follows these 8 guidelines for the sidewalk response team, starting with the mobility challenges. The altered since 1992 is a federal government tag. So we had an onus for anything after Title II to be remediating ADA issues. So that's just a piece of that. Critical ADA routes defined by the Transportation System Plan are of a higher priority and just works down in descending order. So we use this prioritization with the hazards, but what that can mean is somebody could live on a cul-de-sac, dead-end street, or local street and see us repairing something that they view as less of a hazard on a higher used area and say, hey, that's not right, this is more of an issue. And it may be more of an issue, it may be a higher hazard, but it also has other factors in play. Maybe there's less public use of that area. Maybe it's not next to a park, right? Maybe it's really just in front of their house or on a dead-end street.
Right.
So, yeah.
I see something on here that leads to one of my other questions, and that's number 5, the transportation corridors. Within the climate action plan, there is an idea of really focusing sidewalk repairs along the core network and within a quarter of a mile from the core network. That is not something that we have adopted as of yet, but is that, in your opinion, already well represented within the criteria that we already have?
So for this criteria for the response, I don't know that we would need a secondary layer of application to dedicate itself to those areas. It's already heavily represented here through the number 3 and the number 5. Again, as a point here, the only one of these that would be applied 2 through 8 are applied individually, and you get the highest ranking out of those, right? So you'd start, the mobility challenge is the only one there that is added on to the other scores, if that makes sense. But I don't know that this would, adding another layer of these transportation areas, I don't know if that would fit within this framework. We'd probably have to take a look at how we're doing it currently if we were going to add that in.
Okay, one last question. Right now we have $2 million a year set aside for this program, a little bit over. How has inflation impacted our ability to provide the same level of repair? Is it just going down, or are we able to bolster the balance?
So it continues to chew away at what we're able to do, because we'll see inflation not only on material side of things, but areas where we would utilize a contractor that are also inflating their prices. So, but material prices, I just have a request from it's a 17% increase that are requesting coming up in January. So what we had budgeted this fiscal year was not that initially, that climb.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Additional questions for staff?
Mr. Mayor, I do have a little bit more information. Julie Warnicki shared that there's about 300 miles of streets without sidewalk.
Thank you. 300. Thank you. Councilor Nishioka.
Thank you, Mayor. Clearly, what we have is an economic issue in the sense of how much money is directed, if it's going to take 400 years to do this. So how do we fix it? and what can we do? And I see that what year was it that there was a utility fee in 2002, and then a recall on that, and it was removed because that was going to fund. So I guess I'm asking, where could we find funds? Is there any pools of money available to increase this? And I'm also wondering if some of the issue is not enough public works staff to do it, are there options to hire contractors?
Brian Martin again. There are always options to hire contractors. So, Brandon's crews, they do what they can do with that $2 million allocation. If more money were available, we would probably say let's hire contractors and have more, contractors take anything above that amount. As far as how we generate revenue, we've talked, or one of the budget committees has talked at one time about a local gas tax. I mean, that would be a way to generate some funding for sidewalks. One thing that did happen, and Mark Bechtel may have better information on it, but we did pass a street light fee. And so that street light fee, although originally back in the early days it was going to cover sidewalks and street lights, and there's a couple other things in there, by covering the street lights with that fee, that opened up revenue then for the rest of the transportation system. So I think the street light fund is about a 1.9 million-ish annual allotment that goes for street lights. So had we not had that street light fee, the funding that we're talking about for all the other transportation stuff would be $1.9 million less.
Thank you.
Additional questions for staff? Councilor Stapleton.
Thank you. How are we doing on the ADA progress throughout the city? Do you track that separately? And your mic's not on. There you go.
So progress related to the whole, there's a tremendous way to go. As far as compliance with our requirements, our federal requirements, we stay in compliance every year. So, and part of that is that as roads are improved and you have certain maintenance activities on roadways, you have a requirement to update the ADA ramps adjacent to that roadway that's maintained.
Mm-hmm.
There's certain other triggers that take place, and we're 100% compliant with that. As far as the network as a whole and having connectivity or compliance, we're not there.
Okay. I know Brian, you and I have talked a lot about the CIP and about trying to get a better understanding of how much investment we're making of those dollars that do come into the city. Where are those being allocated to, and making sure that there is equity within that system for all modes of transportation. I know I've asked for a pie chart, and I hope to still receive that at some point in time to better understand what that looks like, because I understand the complexities of that ask. A project could have bike lanes and pedestrian infrastructure as well as a whole street, plus, wastewater and all that other stuff going on underneath the street. So I understand the complexities. But I do think it's really important because, all of us are pedestrians during every single trip at some point in time or another. And I find it actually kind of baffling, and please don't freak out when I say this, that we are turning over an entire transportation network or mode of transportation within the city to homeowners. That is a transportation network, just like a road is for cars or bike lanes are for bikes. Sidewalks are a transportation network for people who are walking. And for me, I feel like that really takes away the importance of that network and really kind of pushes it down and kind of relegates it to the lower levels. And as we move forward and become a denser city, especially downtown and in the surrounding areas, I know there's tons of areas out in Ward 6 and Ward 5 that are also very dense. Making sure that people have access to a well-maintained network for walking is really important to me and to a lot of people. Obviously, in my ward, they're very passionate about their sidewalks. And so I want to make sure that we can get as much money put towards pedestrian infrastructure as possible. That is my goal while I'm here, is to find some way to do that. And thank you, Councilor, for bringing up that point, because it's really important that we address the issue.
Thank you, Councilor. Are there any further questions for staff on this item? The next item is also somewhat related, so it may be a good time to transition, but I don't want to cut anybody off. All right, we will then transfer to item 5B. And we have Julie Hanson.
Almost poured my water all over the keyboard. Is which the right one? Is that one the right one? That is the right one, yes. So then I have to put it in presentation mode, I guess. Okay. Good evening, Mayor and City Councilors. My name is Julie Hanson, Transportation Planning Manager. I previously Warneke. Brian called me both tonight, and that's okay. Emails work for both of them. Just, life changed maybe 9 years ago that I'm finally getting around to reflecting in my name. So, let's see. So tonight, I'm going to talk about the transportation-related project categories that were included in the bond without specific locations. So we often refer to these as buckets, just for shorthand, because it's sort of hard to describe otherwise. Just as a reminder, those are listed up on the slide: the safer pedestrian crossings category, sidewalk replacement category, and a sidewalk infill. I'm going to talk about the recommended process and criteria to select project locations that we have been working on, or the bond committee has been working on over the last several months. Talk a bit about equity, since that can mean many different things. And then finally finish with a recommendation to allocate a portion of the sidewalk replacement funds to be delivered with near-term paving projects. So to start with the recommended process to select locations, this is outlined in your staff report. what the bond committee is recommending is that we start with seeking public input on where they think important locations are. Now, we need to recognize, and we do recognize, that we've already heard from the public in many different areas in terms of the sidewalk repairs and replacements that Brandon was referring to, also pedestrian crossings. So we will share what we've already heard as we go out and make sure that more people, hopefully, know that they can make their requests and not maybe just the people who already know the system. Then those locations will be evaluated against criteria that I'll be talking about next. And criteria are very important because the need does vastly exceed the amount of funds that are available, even through these, these buckets that we very much appreciate and are great, but they're not going to cover everything. We will work with staff to develop, engineering staff to develop cost estimates for projects to address the top ranking locations, and then work with the bond committee to develop preliminary recommendations for each one of these buckets. Those recommendations will take into consideration factors outside of the criteria, such as the overall cost of projects. We don't want to have maybe a top-ranking project that costs $8 million take the entire bucket. So those factors will be brought together. Then we will seek public input on the preliminary recommendation before the bond committee finalizes their recommendation and comes forth to City Council for approval. We estimate that the process is going to take between 1 and 2 years to get through. I know that sounds like a long time, but it really depends on the number of requests we get and the complexity of them. So, but after that, we'll be delivering the projects. So this slide shows the recommended criteria. I know it's a little hard to read on the screen. That is also in your staff report. Each category, each bucket has slightly different category reflecting the needs of that program. We tried to keep as much similarity as we could. For example, equity is in all of those, and I'll talk more about that in a second. Street classification, proximity to things like schools, parks, transit. Pedestrian crossing one has some separate criteria in terms of distance to the nearest crossing, as well as pedestrian crashes. And then the sidewalk replacement category, we have a pretty strong emphasis on that hazard assessment that Brandon's group has already developed. Okay, so I said I'd talk a little bit more about equity. What do we mean by equity in this particular case? So we're really talking about need-based equity. So that's not the same as equality, right? It's equity based on need, and we've developed a equity scoring tool for use in this. It's based on 8 categories from the U.S. Census. It's the best available data on this at a census tract level. You can see the categories listed on the screen. These categories align with ones that are used by the Salem-Keizer Metropolitan Planning Organization. This also mirrors what was approved by City Council in the Neighborhood Traffic Management Plan. So this map here, I know you can't see the details, but you can look sort of at the colors. So this shows all the census tracts located within the city limits. They are shaded to reflect where they fall in terms of the in terms of an equity score, using a score between 0 and 25, since it's going to be 25 out of 100 points. The census tracts with the highest scores are the darkest purple on this map. The ones with the lowest scores are the sort of yellowish, white, gray ones. I have on this map, we have overlaid the ward boundaries in red just to help people get sort of oriented to the geography. Now, this tool isn't sort of the only way that we think about equity. It's important to note that we also will be doing outreach to traditionally underserved communities, including working with the city's new Equity Roundtable. So then, as an example, we took all of the sidewalk replacement repair complaints that Brandon has on his system, and we scored them through these criteria using that equity as 25%. And what this map shows, you can't really see any specific dots, but you can tell where the dots are sort of that darker red or orange color, so mostly in the north and northeast area. Those are ones that have the highest score in this criteria. The dark blue, light blue are the ones with the lowest scores. Now, we will be doing outreach to get more dots on this map, or lines or whatever, so this won't be the universe. But in this particular example, with the funding we have available, it would likely go to the ones that are in that darker red or darker orange colors. So then switching to the recommendation to allocate funds for near-term paving projects. This is part of our staff recommendation. Because the process to choose these projects is going to take some time, our engineers looked at the near-term paving projects, particularly those slated for 2024 and 2025, to see if there were any obvious needs that could be partnered with those paving projects to increase the efficiencies of delivery. And so the bond committee recommended allocating some of those sidewalk replacement funds to 3 projects, Liberty Street, Silverton Road, and Commercial Street. So Councilor Stapleton, you asked earlier about what the change was in the staff report. I inadvertently left out that $40,000 on Commercial Street. We had included it in the total number, but somehow $40,000, even though in my pocket it would feel like a lot, just, got overlooked. So with that, the recommendation for this agenda item, I have it up on the slide. You also have it in your revised staff report, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there questions for staff? Councillor Hoy.
Sorry, could you just go back to that slide one more time? I wasn't quite done.
Oh, sorry.
I have a quick question. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Councillor Phillips.
I mean, so this is, thank you, Mayor Hoy, and thank you, Julie, for being here today. So I just want to see if this paraphrase is accurate. Basically, if we pass this recommendation, we'll be adopting a process or an algorithm by which we as a community and a council get these buckets filled in and select projects throughout the city of Salem.
Yes, you'll be process and criteria. The ultimate decision of the locations will still come back to City Council after going to the bond steering committee, but it will be framed by this process and criteria.
So, I mean, would this kind of create kind of a filter or a ranking process?
Yes.
Okay. And is this sufficient to take care of every single problem we have?
No.
Do we have any sense on like order of magnitude? Will this take care of 5% of our need, 10%?
I don't really. I mean, the only one that I've looked at the closest is the pedestrian crossing one, where the allocation in the bond was for $3.54 million. And given current costs, that would build about 7 pedestrian crossings. And we already have in the books about 160 or so. So that's not quite that much. The other buckets are a little bit higher, the 8.7 for the sidewalk replacement. But if you look at what Brandon's group has been already operating with, about $2 million a year, this one-time 8.7, is still just a portion of that. Yeah. The sidewalk infill is the one where we probably have the least data. We know where we have missing sidewalks, but what we're going to hear from the public in terms of what are the most important out of 300 miles, I mean, we're not going to be able to get some of my favorite streets, I know.
Well, thank you for this presentation and the small group meetings that we had ahead of time.
Further questions, Councillor Nordijk?
Thank you. So I appreciate and support the criteria you've identified. What I want to understand is you want us to follow the process and apply this criteria for future projects, and you want us to authorize money for 3 projects right now?
Yes.
Okay, and did those 3 projects, the Liberty, Silverton, and Commercial Street projects, did they go through this scoring process?
No, because the scoring process doesn't exist until council approves it. We did look high level at how we thought they would score, and so I think I would say that we thought that they would score pretty well, but no, it did not.
Okay, I guess I just don't understand, why aren't these 3 projects being put in the same list of potential projects with all the others? Why do they get to go first and without having the scoring criteria?
I will take a crack at it, and if Brian wants to add something, that would be welcome. The reason we looked at these initially is because we do get efficiencies when we deliver a paving project. We're already going to be doing the ADA ramps as required along those sidewalks, and so we're already doing that work, so it makes sense to look and see, is there some replacement that we can do to make a continuous corridor for people to actually be able to get from point A to point B, something like Brandon had alluded to. We're working on connectivity. So we worked through that with the bond committee, and in particular, I would say on Silverton Road, there are a lot of sidewalk issues along Silverton Road that create barriers, and so the recommendation of the committee was to focus on one side of the street and one side of the street only. So the north side is what that allocation is being recommended for. Now, a case could be made for not doing them now and then just have them go through that process. It's just that it would lose that efficiency related to mobilization and already have work going on that street.
And Councilor, if I could just add in, because as a member of the bond committee, what I understood it to, the reason for this is it maximizes our bond dollars because we're already tearing up that area. We're already doing work out there. It actually allows the money to go farther on more projects because it's already, these were projects in the queue, but since we were doing the work for other reasons, it would allow us to do more projects within the bond. Councilor Stapleton.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. We also knew that just from the area of town and the map that we have, that this was a high needs area for walkability. And I believe it has a really high percentage of folks who don't have a car or who have one car. I forget what the measurement on that one was. I forget to look that up.
The shading area is a compilation of all of those 8 categories that include no access to a car, lower income, and those other factors, disabilities. And so if you can sort of imagine in your mind where Silverton Road is, you can see that that is in an area that's pretty high. Now, Liberty out here by City Hall is one of the other ones, and that is relatively high still. However, that other thing about that one is that it is access to governmental buildings, which is really high in the ADA realm in terms of priority.
I did have one other question.
Sure.
So could you go to the sidewalk one that you had up? I just wanted to clarify that currently, right now, we're doing equality for our sidewalk program, but equity for our bond projects. And if we were to have equity be a part of our every year $2 million that we allocate to sidewalk repair, the repairs would look very, very different. Is that correct?
Well, I think they would just be focused in the north and northeast. So, looking at that map, the majority of the projects through the bond program are going to be focused in that area. The annual program will still go throughout the city. So we're hitting an area with a bond to get areas where the service is needed. It's greater due to the equity, but at the same time with the program, everyone's still going to get a piece of sidewalk repairs in their wards.
Any further questions for staff? All right, thank you. Are we ready for a motion then?
I think so. Can I just move staff recommendations?
Second.
Motion by Stapleton, second by Phillips. Discussion?
Thank you. Working on the bond committee and with staff on this project was really a great experience for me. So often equity is just a checkbox that we have, and this was an opportunity to actually put it into action. And so that process felt really, really good. And I'm excited to see what comes from it and how we can learn from this experience to apply equity in other areas of city work.
Thank you, Councilor. Further discussion? Councilor Hoy.
Just one little thing. When we spoke, we talked about this equity issue, and I just want to be certain that when we seek public comment, we do that in such a way that includes everybody, not just the people who have access to computers, and I think about school kids in Ward 6 in particular, who might get the most information they receive from the city through school. So just to consider how we go about communicating those questions and getting responses.
Thank you, Councilor. Further discussion? Councilor Nordyke.
Sure. Just one other thing. As we roll out the input process, I think language equity is going to be really important too. There are some folks who just know how to reach us and ask for things. And I think that's what Councilor Hoy is referring to. I think it is incredibly important that we have this information in Spanish at a minimum, and then look at other languages as well. And just as Councilor Hoy said, people receive information in different ways, and there are some groups who have no idea that you can ask for these things. And how does the city know who has mobility issues if you don't know to speak up and self-identify? I mean, we have imperfect information on folks with mobility issues, and there are plenty of folks in Ward 7 who are elderly and who cannot walk without the aid of some sort of mobility assistance. So I think moving forward, I really think that how we talk to people and who we talk to is going to mean everything in terms of getting accurate scores for who else gets to have a sidewalk or a sidewalk repair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Just to clarify, the information on those criteria that Julie outlined are coming from the census. So that's data that we receive from the government that people have. Every person theoretically in our community has self-identified. So we actually receive that information via census tract. So that's where that number comes from. Further discussion? All right. Will the recorder please call the roll?
Councilor Gonzalez.
Aye.
Councilor Hoy.
Aye.
Councilor Nordyke. Aye. Councilor Varney.
Aye.
Councilor Stapleton.
Aye.
Councilor Nishioka.
Aye.
Councilor Phillips.
Aye.
Councilor Gwynn.
Aye.
Mayor Hoy.
Aye. Motion passes. And we are on to the pulled item 3.3F. Councilor Gwynn.
I move staff recommendation.
Second.
Motion by Gwynn, second by Phillips. Councilor, to your motion.
So I just wanted to highlight this one, and I'm sorry to keep you here so late. Krishna, if I had any idea, I wouldn't have done it. The reason that I pulled this, though, is given our budget constraints that we are currently facing, I just wanted someone to speak to the fact that we are spending money on FTEs. So, thank you.
Krishna Namburi, Deputy City Manager. I would like for Michelle Bennett, our HR Assistant Director, to come in and kind of speak about this. So.
Good evening, councilors, mayor. Michelle Bennett, Assistant HR Director. Can I say long-time listener, first-time caller? Be kind. No. Yes, thank you for your question, Councilor Gwynn. As you know, the Human Resources interacts with our employees on a daily basis. As we've entered into this year, kind of coming out of COVID, the increased need for human resource services has significantly shown itself. So some of the positions that you're referring to are so that we can attend to our employees and meet their needs. Salem Housing Authority has significantly increased its staff over the past 2 years, which has put a significant demand on their HR services, as well as Public Works. They too have had increased needs. So those positions, or that one position for human resources, will be coming from funds that are not general fund. They'll be coming from the Housing Authority and from Public Works. The other position for human resources is coming from a benefits fund, and it will be offset by ending a service that we've been outsourcing. So again, that position will help attend to the needs of our employees with regard to protected leave and the newly instituted paid leave Oregon. So those are those two positions. The WVCC position also is not a general fund position. It is adding 0.4 FTE. They too have experienced a demand for public records requests, various and other increased services with some, I believe, subpoenas and things like that that they've had to take care of. And it's just evolved. That position needs to be full-time. And then the final position is also a utility fund position for Public Works. And over the past 3 years, we've been steadily working to ensure that our wages are competitive in our AFSCME contract. And this is a position that through the course of either contract selectives and or our own market review, this position is now not aligned properly with its comparators internally. So we have some internal equity issues with this position, and that's what that change is for.
So bottom line, no general fund
Correct.
dollars for any of these.
Correct.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Further discussion? Will the recorder please call the roll?
Councillor Hoy.
Aye.
Councillor Nordijk. Aye. Councillor Varney.
Aye.
Councillor Stapleton.
Aye.
Councillor Nishioka.
Aye.
Councillor Phillips.
Aye.
Councillor Gwynn.
Aye.
Councillor Gonzalez.
Aye.
Mayor Hoy.
Aye. Excuse me. Aye. Motion passes. And now we are on to information reports. We'll just go through these, and please speak up if you have any questions or comments on any of them. Item 6A. 6B. Councillor Phillips.
Yeah, I reviewed this application and approval for a new multifamily 279-unit apartment complex, and I had some questions in regards to what was approved specifically in terms of the tree regulation or the tree regulation variance. Who would I direct those questions to? Lisa.
Ms. Anderson Ogilvie is approaching the microphone.
So the first question is this like was the application made before or after we updated our tree codes? Because we recently did that during my tenure here.
Sure. Lisa Anderson Ogilvie, your planning administrator. This came in afterwards, and so they needed a tree variance, and that's part of their application was a tree variance to remove significant trees on the property.
So I don't have the numbers pulled up in front of me, but I looked at it earlier today, and it looked like they were, removing 80 out of 130 trees roughly, and I think they kept like 35% of the trees. What does the new code say they could do? Like, what's the difference compared to what we allow in terms of the significant trees?
Yeah, so the first thing in the new code is that many more trees are significant than used to be. So it used to just be Oregon white oaks 24 inches or greater. And now it's Oregon white oaks 20 inches or greater, so smaller Oregon white oaks. And then any tree species that's 30 inches DBH, diameter, breast height, or greater. So it could be any species. So a whole host of trees are now significant that maybe weren't in the past. So that's the first thing. And then we do list situations where we want to say it's okay to remove trees. So utilities, planned streets, grading needed to meet ADA or fire access or both, and then needed for minimum density. So I know this site is extremely steep. So this is out by Corbin University. It's a kind of odd shaped parcel. It's Amsville Highway on one side and Joseph Street on the other. The property is actually so steep that the apartments don't have internal connections. So some of the buildings are going to be down below and some will be up higher. And the only connection will be the public sidewalk where it will meet ADA, but they couldn't actually connect them internally, some of the buildings, because of the steepness. They do have to grade on site to meet ADA between the buildings and then the parking lot. Okay. So that led to it, but they did try to keep a cluster of trees together in the middle where they're not grading to offset that.
So like in terms of our rules for significant trees, is there some percentage they're supposed to keep, or are they supposed to keep all of them? I can't remember. Can you remind me?
Yeah, only if you're doing a subdivision, and then you have to do a tree conservation plan, and you have to save 30%. And if you go below the 30%, then we brought in those mitigation measures, adding EV charging, middle housing, a lot dedicated just to trees, etc. So this is multifamily, so it's not quite the same process. The same types of trees are considered significant, so it doesn't matter there. But they went through a variance process instead.
So, I mean, it looks like they saved more than 30% of the significant trees. So what's the, like, I couldn't fully understand quickly, what was the variance? What do they need that's not in our code? Like, what's different than our baseline?
Yeah, it's just the number of trees. So just because it's not a subdivision, it's just one lot, and they're going to keep it as one lot. So we don't have that, you're not creating small lots somewhere. It's just a different process. So because of that, they needed the variance. It's still an administrative process, just like a tree conservation plan would be. It's part of this application that went out for notice and was approved with the entire development, and then it's available for call-up or an appeal, which would be the same as like a subdivision with a tree plan.
I mean, I think we definitely need more housing units, throughout our state and especially in our city. And I think that it makes sense to me to have, this type of housing near a place of higher learning. My guess is there'll be, utilization right there. So I think I'm very much in support of this, but it was just an opportunity to kind of see how our, updated code comes into place. And it's a good reminder, this isn't, the multiple, different subunits. It's just one, and it's an apartment complex. So I appreciate that. I didn't see that the neighborhood association had any comments, and I haven't seen any testimony that anyone was concerned about this.
No, when it originally went through a zone change a few years ago, there was a lot of concern from the neighbors that live outside the urban growth boundary across Joseph and at the end, and it really had to do with access and where a driveway was going to be. So that was worked out at the time of the zone change, and then since then it seems fine.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'm impressed that they were able to save 35% of the trees that are significant. And I think that there's some hope with our updates to the way we track these trees, that the trees we do save are very likely to survive. And so I think it's okay. I don't plan to call this up. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Item 6C, Councilor Nishioka.
Thank you, Mayor Hoy. I believe this will be directed to Mr. Martin. I have a question about the riparian space that is going to be applied of 170 feet in the floodplain areas, and I'm wondering how this might affect homes that have their yard that's right next to Mill Creek or another waterway. How are we going to be managing that?
I'm going to call Robin Dahlke up. She's been working on this plan. I think she has a little bit more information than I do.
Good evening. I'm Robin Dahlke. I'm Development Services Operations Manager. And you're probably referring to one of the action items that's recommended in the plan. That action item is recommended as part of the draft implementation process that FEMA's going through. They're going through a NEPA review currently. There's a lot involved in that process that has been over a 10-year time period, developed through Department of State Lands, FEMA, communities. There's been a public comment period. So that 170-foot riparian buffer has not been established as a setback that the city has to adopt. It's just a draft recommendation to address a lawsuit that FEMA received for protection of endangered species in Oregon. So this is a statewide change that could affect our communities, and that we're definitely aware of concerns that particularly would affect Salem, where we have corridors with very limited lot depth, and it could, in State Street corridor, you look at the depth of those lots, 170 feet restrictions could really affect redevelopment potential. So we're definitely keeping our eye on that, but don't have a point where we can provide comment, I guess, at this stage. We just included it because we know it's something we have to look forward to for review.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anything further on 6C? Thank you. 6D. 6E. 6F. 6G. All right, that concludes the information reports. We have no first readings. We're on to second readings.
Ordinance Bill number 523, an ordinance relating to overlay zones, amending the Salem zoning map by repealing the Oxford West Nob Hill overlay zone, Oxford Hoyt overlay zone, and Hoyt McGillcrest overlay zone, amending SRC 110.030, 621.015, and SRC 625.015, and repealing SRC 622, 623, 624, 900.220, and 900.225. Councillor Nordyke.
Aye.
Councillor Varney.
Aye.
Councillor Stapleton.
Aye.
Councillor Nishioka.
Aye.
Councillor Phillips.
Aye.
Councillor Gwynn.
Aye.
Councillor Gonzalez.
Aye.
Councillor Hoy.
Aye.
Mayor Hoy.
Aye. Motion passes. We have nobody signed up for public comment under number 8. We're adjourned.